Well, welcome out to our communications training today, communication skills for advocates. I hope that's what you're looking for. That's where you're sitting. If you think you're supposed to be somewhere else, feel free to move there now. A few little housekeeping issues. It's always good at the beginning to start by turning off your electronics. I made sure I turned mine off. What else? Oh, you may want to find a seat where you can see not only the slides up front, we're going to be doing role plays, so you might want to be close to the front so you can see those, hear those, hopefully participate in those. We're also going to be breaking into little triads, so be looking around you to see a couple of would-be partners, breaking into little groups of 3 later on to do practices. So be thinking of who you'd like to team up with later on. Well, we just had 2 of our mics die on us. So we'll probably wait a little while on the triads. They're going to be working on the technology there. In the meantime, we do have one functioning mic, so we're up and running. It's a pleasure to have you all out here. And my name is David Christian. I'll be the presenter today. How many of you were in this workshop last year? In this very room, as a matter of fact. 1, 2, we got a few back for seconds. Isn't that amazing? I must not have done a very good job the first time. Sorry about that. We'll try to get it right this time for you. Actually, that's a great thing. Been to multiple MI workshops. I've been to probably half a dozen in my lifetime. Every time I go to one, I learn something different, or I learn to do something in MI a little bit better. So that's great. Let's make sure our clicker's working now. I think we're good to go. So a little bit of an introduction from me. I am a clinical psychologist by profession. I see clients every week, about 28 of them. And then the rest of the time, I'm a trainer and presenter, training mostly MI. This is by far my most popular presentation. In fact, I get so much call for this one, I don't have time to do the other ones that I like to do too, but this is a great one. I also happen to be CCL's leader for our effective communication team, and I'm going to put a plug in for that right now. If you haven't joined our effective communication team, I would strongly encourage you. We get together on a monthly basis. It is the second Wednesday of each month at 6 o'clock Mountain Time. That's where, when I do it, you can do the math to see what time it would be for you. But we get together and we do MI training. And we'll take what we're going to learn today and we break it down into small units, and then we'd spend a whole 15 minutes diving in and really practicing one of the skills in depth. So feel free to join us for that if you get the chance. So what's our purpose today? This will be running from 2 until 5:15. That's 3 hours, 15 minutes. We're going to take some breaks in there. Let's do a quick check, by the way, on breaks. How many of you would like to do 1 or 15-minute break in the middle versus 2 breaks, a couple of, say 10-minute breaks spaced appropriately in there? How many of you would rather just do 1 nice longer break? How many would like to do 2 smaller breaks? Oh, dang. It's sort of flip of the coin. Okay. Oh, let's just do 1 good one in the middle. It's close enough. I'm going to do a good one right in the middle. All right. Well, I've also noticed it's hard to gather everybody up after we get everybody else. So maybe if we do that once, that'll be a little easier. What are we talking about today? Oh, question.
Well, we can't really see what's written on the bottom if you're not sitting in the front row.
Dang. I'm sorry to hear that. How many of you are having difficulty seeing the bottom of the slides? Looks like mostly people in the very back. What I would recommend is, let's just go ahead and do this right now. There are several chairs over here. If you would like to take, there's room for 6 or 8 more people over here. There's actually 4 or 5 chairs in that corner. You're welcome to take one of those. There's several up here on the front row that are still empty, and there's a few up here that are closer. So if you're having trouble with those slides, feel free to move now. Thank you for calling that to our attention. We've got some help with the chairs there. Great. Any other questions or concerns before we kick off? All right. So how many of you have had some motivational interviewing training? Because you may have picked this up in a number of other professions. A few of you have. That's great. It's a communication skill package that is now showing up in other professions. It started in the helping professions, but it is now catching on. Anytime you have to work with people, you will probably find MI a great tool. So, motivational interviewing is a communication method that motivates cooperation anytime you have to cooperate with others. And of course, today we're going to be talking about how to use MI to cooperate and collaborate, not only with your member of Congress, which of course is first and foremost in our mind on lobby day, but you're going to find MI useful for working with many other people in Citizens Climate Lobby, within your local group, your state group, recruiting, tabling, virtually any event. I'll give you a quick anecdote. Before all of you came in, there was a meeting here. You may have noticed there was another conference. I think it's called the Faith and Freedom Group. That's one of them. And so one of the gentlemen from that came in and said, so who are you guys? I said, oh, we're Citizens Climate Lobby. He said, so what are you about? And I said, oh, we're promoting carbon fee and dividend as a way to address climate change. And he let me know that we don't need to worry about that. And I said, can you help me understand that? And he says, well, I checked and the oceans aren't rising. I said, how did you do that? He said, well, I live on the coast, I'm in the Carolinas, and I went out and I put a stake in the sand and I monitored it for a year. The oceans aren't rising. So I thanked him for sharing that with me. So all of you know that we have a bit of a challenge on our hands. And we're going to be talking about how to use MI, not only when we're interacting with people like this gentleman, who believes very sincerely. He let me know that he's checked the science, climate change is not an issue, and you know, we don't want to put the coal people out of business anyway, and he let me know that this really isn't a concern. We're going to talk about how to use MI with people who we would, in our vernacular, we would say that this person is in what we call the pre-contemplation stage. That's a fancy scientific term, and he's not even contemplating the possibility that there's a problem here. And MI is for people like that. We can adapt MI to pre-contemplators, contemplators, those who say, well, maybe climate change is a problem. That's the maybe group. Then we can talk about those who are in the preparation phase. They say, yeah, it's a problem, but I don't really know what to do about it. I'm kind of looking to do something, but how do I do that? They're looking for resources or action options. And we'll talk about how to do it for people who are in the action phase. That's all new, by the way. In fact, some of you are in the most advanced stage of change, which is what we call maintenance. When somebody's been doing something consistently for 6 months or more, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, they're in the maintenance phase. That would probably be most of you in this room. And that taxonomy is something that we apply in my field, clinical psychology. If I'm working with a person who has an addiction and they don't see any problem with it, they're court referred to me, they're in the pre-contemplation phase. They don't have a problem. The justice system's got a problem with them, but they don't have a problem. MI was designed for people of all of those stripes, all the way up to the person who says, yes, I have a drug problem and I know I've got to do something about it. Please help, and I need your help. Of course, those are the clients we all love to get. Sadly, they're not as common as we'd like them to be. So we'll talk about how to use these tools with everyone, whether you run into a gentleman like the one I just mentioned at your tabling event, or whether you're using this within your group to resolve conflicts. Because I know it's hard to believe. Even we here at Citizens Climate Lobby have differences of opinion on how we should do things and when we should do things and so forth. MI is designed to build collaboration in any of those contexts. So I hope you're thinking of questions about how can I use MI with my problem. If you're thinking about personal applications, this will be much more relevant to you. Question over there. Thank you. Quick review for those of you who are interested. And by the way, if you want more information, it's called the Stages of Change model, also known as the trans-theoretical model. And the stages are pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And if you want just one term to do a Google search, they'll give you more than you care to know about all of those and what we know about them. There's a big body of research. That's the Stages of Change model, or the trans-theoretical model, developed by Prochaska, Norcross, and DiClemente, University of Rhode Island. And it's been around for 30 or 40 years now. We have an extensive body of research on it. It really gives us a lot of help in how to move people through those different stages of change with regard to any topic: smoking cessation, treatment of depression, anxiety, things that I tend to do a lot of in my clinical practice, and certainly climate change issues. It applies very nicely there too. By the way, thank you for that question. Don't hesitate to ask questions. I like interruptions. If your question is going to be addressed later in the presentation and say, hey, let's hold that, it's coming up, But a lot of times, if you're having a question, there's a good chance others in the audience would have that same question. So feel free. Any other questions before we dive into the meat of the presentation? Great. So, bit of a recap here. We want to apply MI today to lobby meetings, recruiting volunteers, training members, handling group conflicts, casual climate conversations, and dealing even with your crazy Uncle Harry. How many of you have a crazy Uncle Harry that you have to talk about this kind of stuff with? Yeah, most of us do. In-laws, you know. So this might make your next Thanksgiving dinner a little more palatable.
I just have a question. How does MI work if two people on opposite sides of the spectrum both kind of know and are trying to use the technique?
Oh, this is MI. Do you know? That's a great question. And you know, that's such a beautiful question because it really brings up some really pertinent issues. Here's the beautiful thing. Many people have the mistaken notion that MI is a bag of secret weapons. Secret psychological tools that you can use to get other people to do your bidding. Actually not. It is truly, I know, some of you are really mad, I understand. Disappointment over the word. But it works great with family members too. Except my wife knows it. Sometimes she'll say, "You're doing MI with me, aren't you?" And she appreciates it, and it gets back to your question. Because MI is deeply respectful, collaborative communication. If you have two people that are diametrically opposed on an issue, and they're both using MI, it will be the most respectful, collaborative conversation by two diametrically opposed people you've ever seen in your life. Our world would be a heck of a lot better place if we had MI out there. So some people say, "You're not teaching this to the other side, are you?" And I go, "Oh, yes, please." Do you know how much easier our job would be if every member of Congress knew MI and used it in our lobby meetings with us? We'd all move forward. We'd waste a lot less time in wasted conflict and friction. So, no, that's a great question. It's a skill set that really would be best if everybody, in fact, I go and I teach this to organizations where people within the organization are going to be using it on both sides with each other to facilitate getting to collaboration much faster. Thank you for that question. Was there another one? Okay. I think it's useful to kind of know where things came from. Here's how I came to appreciating MI. I grew up in this town. That's St. George, Utah. It's down in Rosanna National Park. If any of you have been to that national park, that's where you see all those red rocks in the background. It's a great place to grow up. Had about 5,000 people in it when I grew up. Sleepy little town, off the beaten path. But it had one interesting feature. For about 20 to 30 years, the Atomic Energy Commission, right over that hill you can see in the distance, was testing these. And we were the first town down the end from the test site. At times, we now know, in retrospect, over 1,000 times the allowed limit of nuclear radiation and fallout landing on us. Some of this while I was a child. Not a good time to be exposed to radiation, I might add. Well, the Atomic Energy Commission assured us that the atomic tests are conducted with adequate assurances for public safety. You can trust your government, of course. But then we started noticing cancer, lots of cancer. Cancers we'd never seen before. Cancers that we discovered were radiation related. And of course, the federal government had no intention of accepting responsibility and would deny their culpability whatsoever. Quick example, this is a fellow by the name of Admiral Pickett. He lives 1 block from my home in St. George. I went to school with his son. Admiral Pickett lost 10 family members to radiation-related leukemia. Admiral testified before Congress about how he'd been misled about the safety of the testing. But did this change Congress's mind? As bad members, we had organized, and our purpose was to get compensation for the radiation-related cancers our community was suffering, and they didn't want anything to do with it. Strangely, it's not as easy to move Congress as you might guess. Some of you are noticing that. So even very heartfelt stories, we thought this would be obvious, but it wasn't. So we decided data. Data's going to do the trick. We need good, hard, epidemiological, scientific data. So we collected it. I was involved in some of those epidemiological studies, out collecting information, very carefully conducted scientific studies by our state epidemiologist. Boy, did we get the numbers. We found there was a direct correlation between the exposure to the radiation and the cancer rates. Good, solid scientific data based on thousands of people. Do you think that did the trick? What? Data doesn't convince people? Well, you may have noticed that. So, to make a long story short, in 1990, it took us 30 years. We passed the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which thus far has put out $1.8 billion in compensation for victims. Many of them are my family members. Some are dead and gone, but some are still dealing with the lingering effects. So we achieved success, but my question to you is, why did it take 30 years? Do we have 30 years at CCL? I don't think so. I hope not. From the time, by the way, that crater that you see there was detonated when I was 3 years old. It's 1,800 feet across. It spread radioactive isotopes all over me and my community. 30 years from then is when we got this bill through. What I learned from being a downwinder and being involved in that activism is that data by themselves don't do the trick. Data is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Why is that? Well, a lot of research has happened over those years, and I intend to share some of the good news from it with you today. We learned that the human brain is programmed to defend against threats to our tribe, our values, and or our self-esteem on an individual level. What does that mean for us as lobbyists? Motivational interviewing is a set of tools that helps you get around this. Let me give you some examples of the problems this creates. We have names for them now that come out of the research. Some of you may have heard of the backfire effect. This is a well-researched phenomenon. Look it up on the web, you'll learn a lot more. Yes?
Will we be able to get a copy of the slides?
As far as I know, we'll post them at CCL on the website so you can get the slides. In fact, they're being included. They're filming this right now, and they're capturing all of the slides directly, so I assume that will be part of what you can get access to. Yes, I'm getting a nod from our guys in the back. So, the backfire effect. The backfire effect has demonstrated that if I present you with hard data contradicting your existing opinion on something that's important to you, it will not only not have an effect, it will actually drive you deeper into being more committed to your existing set of beliefs. What? Yes?
The smarter they are, the more ideas that they can come up with of what they're right and they're wrong.
You've seen this. You've seen this. Isn't this amazing? I thought we were such a rational species. Well, we are, but it turns out the research shows we are selectively rational. We use our rationality to defend our tribe, our values, and our self-esteem. That's what we use these great powers of reasoning for, and we're really good at it. But we can defend a set of values that really aren't supportable by the best data out there, as you probably noticed. How else does this happen? Let me introduce you to a personal friend of mine. This is Dr. Robert Davies. He's the state climatologist for the state of Utah. He has a PhD in atmospheric science. He's very up on the data about climate change. In fact, he has many public presentations on it. They're great if you get a chance. Robert can show you what's going to happen in New York City with ocean level rise. But what does the research say happens when we present people with a fear-based message? Here's what it says. When we expose people to a fear-producing message like this, even though it's well-grounded in science, this too causes a backfire effect. People tend to avoid the message giver. That's the biggest impact it has because you're making them anxious. And humans are motivated to keep their anxiety down. Now, there are some special conditions under which a fear-based message will work. Question. Why is Fox News so successful? Great question. Why is it not having a backfire effect there? Who do you think Fox News is successful with? Is it successful with you? No. Are you a member of that tribe? No. The people that Fox News is successful with are people that are already members of that tribe. It reifies and reinforces existing belief systems, which is very consistent with this. Whole theory of cognitive dissonance developed by a fellow by the name of Leon Festinger in 1959, book by that title if you're interested. We've got lots of research on that one. Since the year I was born, I'll give that away, 1959. So when I talk with my friend Robert Davies, we have to point out that he has to be very careful in creating fear in his message because he could actually undermine his intended purpose with regard to climate change. We'll talk more about how to get around that with MI. One last one, confirmation bias. Well-researched phenomenon. The confirmation bias, you've read the cartoon now, I see. The confirmation bias says that we as humans will selectively listen to information that confirms our existing biases, we will seek it out actively, and we will actively ignore information that challenges our pre-existing conclusions and notions. Good grief, there it is again. Reason working against us. Question here.
You had started to say there are a couple situations in which fear works differently.
Yes.
I was wondering if you were going to touch on the times I'm sure we can all think of in which fear has effectively driven population.
Yes. Since you're back, I'll go ahead and do that right now, because I'll bet others are having that same question. When is it okay to use a fear-based message? We've used it with our kids. You do that, stick your finger in that outlet, and you wait what's going to happen. Fear does work, but let's take the case of Johnny sticking his finger in an outlet. To use a very simple one, that one just popped into my head. If you stick your finger in the outlet, Johnny, it's going to hurt really bad. I watched what happens when you do this to my father one day. He was working on an electrical system and accidentally connected with a 700-volt capacitor. I watched it blow him as a 250-pound man across our living room to the other side of the room. I suddenly got a deep respect for electricity. He survived. So modeling is important, but fear does work under a few rare conditions, and here's the chief one. I'll just give you the chief one. What we've learned from the research is if you're going to raise fear with your message, you have to raise self-efficacy equal to or higher than the fear. What's this self-efficacy business? That is, you have to paint a clear path the person can take to escape the negative consequence you have just alerted them to. And it has to be something that they say, I can do that, it's accessible to me, I know how to do that, and they have to be as confident that they can avoid the feared consequence as they are that the feared consequence will surely arise. But too many people who use fear as their driving message or their message driver forget to raise self-efficacy. You have to show the path that will help the person escape the feared consequence, and that has to be even stronger than the fear you've created. Otherwise, backfire effect for you. Great question. Sorry, no question?
Build a wall.
Build a wall is an example of that. Here are some of the common methods that you and I are inclined to use. It's our human nature. We tend to use reason. We tend to go on rants. Let me just give you a quick example. We had a CCL meeting in Utah conducted by our fearless leader, Dave, right here in the red shirt. This was last week. It was a lovely meeting. We had a potluck. And we had a new person there, and she said, she's very new to CCL. You may remember this, Dave. You know where I'm going with this story. And she was just so, and we love these people at CCL. They are full of passion. And she says, oh, you know, well, if I get to a congressional office, can I go on a rant? What do you guys think? Show your passion, right? Be very careful with rants. In fact, in general, I'd advise you to stay away from the rant. There are more effective methods. Under a few select conditions, a rant might have its place. So these are what we sometimes call the dirty dozen because they too often create the backfire effect. Rants, warnings, scaring people, challenging them, making demands, blaming them, proving your point with data, lecturing, disapproving, debating, and if all else fails, try the guilt trip. The dirty dozen. Why? Because they've all been shown to have way too much potential for backfire effect. So if not that, then what? These methods that I just outlined tend to trigger defenses because you're challenging the person's tribe, their values, or their self-esteem. And as soon as you challenge one of those, you're going to get one of these three responses. We call it the fight or flight. There's a third F most people haven't heard of. It's called freeze. You've seen that one too. You hit people with some of these arguments, they don't do anything. They just freeze up. They don't want to do anything else. I've seen this happen after some scary climate change presentations by very credible people. I've talked to people afterwards and they say, that scared me so bad, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to live out my life and hope for the best. That's a freeze response. We don't want that. Well, here's the good news. We've painted a picture of some of the problems with the kinds of communication we're given to use. In 1993, something new appeared on the horizon. This man, Bill Miller, psychologist, developed a package through very extensive research. And this package is of communication skills that avoid defensiveness and they motivate the opposite, cooperation. He called that package of skills, which has been refined ever since then. That was just the first publication on it. They've been refined ever since. That there's a very active body of research ongoing. We have over 1,200 published, well, it's up to 1,400, excuse me, 1,400 published studies now on motivational interviewing and its effectiveness in a variety of contexts. So if you like data, there's more than enough here on new stuff. And I'm not using data to convince you because we know what that's going to do. Unless you're already convinced, then it just strengthens you. Where do I use MI? Here are a few of the places. I train MI to physicians and nurses because they have to share information with clients. But if you've got a diabetic patient and you say, you know, Mr. Jones, your weight's way too high, you're eating a crappy diet, you're not exercising, let's change all of that. You're likely to get the backfire effect. Do you think Mr. Jones doesn't know any of those three things you just told him? He's abundantly aware of them. But what MI has been shown to do is that if physicians use MI when they have that discussion with a patient, the patient is much more likely to take actions, to start moving through those stages of change from a pre-contemplator to a contemplator to preparing and into action. And it's quite amazing the results you can get. So I train physicians and nurses. I train information technicians because they have to work with clients and get them to adopt new technologies. I'm terrible at adopting new technologies. My children drive me kicking and screaming to just upgrade some software program. I deal with educators, psychologists, business people, finance people, agencies, because in each of these cases, people, professionals have to collaborate. And what we're learning is that information is insufficient. It's necessary if you're going to bring about change, but it is insufficient by itself in most cases unless you're preaching to the choir, which sadly is not our luxury. MI is helpful to virtually any professional or any person who is trying to collaborate with another party. There's MI. Oh, I have a handout for you. Oh, that's great rejoicing. Let's see, would you mind passing this out for a moment? It's right there. It's that step right there in the front. Thank you. So, what you're going to get is a picture of what you see on screen with a little bit more detail right now. That's MI. That's everything we're covering today. There's 4 skill sets. We're going to go through those 4 skill sets, and I hope to give you some good, solid practice with each of those skill sets today. But let's get some realistic expectations. You're not going to leave as masters of MI today, but hopefully I'll whet your appetite so you'll get kind of addicted and hooked and want some more. So here's our chief objectives. We want to learn those 4 MI skill sets that you just saw coming on your handout. We want to practice those MI skills. Those are the 2 things we're going to do for the rest of today. Sounds simple. How are we going to do that? We have 4 methods. I like to call these the 4 Ds. And the 4 Ds are, with each of those concepts, I'm going to define it, give you some examples on the screen, so at least we all know what we're talking about. Then I'm going to try to do a demonstration of most of these, which means I need your help. I'm going to have you come up and play a member of Congress or play crazy Uncle Harry. It really doesn't matter. Members of Congress are our favorites because we're getting ready for lobby days. But I'll need somebody to help me do some demos up here. And you get a little feel, and this is how it happens. I have no idea what you're going to do in these, but that's where you're at. When you use MI, you're not going to have any idea what your MOC is going to do, so why shouldn't I be in the same boat with you? Then you do it. And that's the most potent part of our learning experience today is when you dive into it, we'll do that mostly in the form of triads. And then finally, after we do something, we're going to discuss it. So we can say, here's what went well, here's what confused me, or here's what I think needs some improvement. And we'll discuss that as a group. So that's our objectives and methods. Now it's time to create triads. Triads are just groups of 3. And these are the 3 people you're going to be practicing with for the rest of the afternoon. Now, should you pick somebody you know? You may if you'd like to, but it's a great opportunity to get acquainted with some real people too. So I don't care if you pick the buddies you came with today or if you pick two people that you have never met before, but what I'd like you to do is take a moment now, and I left my bell home, so I'm just going to go, ding, that's the bell. I'm your ding bell. So take a moment now, and what I'd like you to do is each of you take about 1 minute, share your name, your hometown, grade in CCL, and one interesting fact.
Selfish if it's okay, but I want to do the practice.
Cool, that's great, Dave. We'll do it. Switch to the next person, switch to the next person. Seconds.
Co-leaders of a group in the northern part of our city.
Switch to a third person. Introduce yourself. Seconds. All eyes forward. Thank you for moving your chairs to accommodate that, because I don't want to see anyone leaving a chiropractor when we're done. So if you need to, feel free to move chairs. In fact, some of them up here, it's easier for them. If you are embedded in rows, if you would like to, you're welcome. There's spare chairs over here when it comes time for role plays. If you want to come take chairs up here in front, whatever you need to do, there's some wiggle room in that back corner too, so feel free. But if you can live in a row of 3 people, good for you. So, you're now acquainted with your group members, a little bit about who they are, where they come from, what they're doing in CCL. That's great. Those are the 3 people that you're going to be practicing the exercises with for the rest of the afternoon. And a little word about role plays. People get freaked out about role play sometimes because they think, oh, I've got to do something great. Oh, question over here. Four is fine because that just happens, but so feel free to jump in. But if there's some extras and you want to form a new group, if you're a 4th member and want to become a group of 3, raise your hands. One back there, everybody's happy, darn it. So jump. Say what? You want to go before? She would want to go. Who else is the fourth member that would be willing to form a new triad? We need one more. There's one. This fellow right here. So we have a group for you. There they are. Those three. Great. So, triads. Just a word about triads. I want you to have fun today. This is not serious. This is practice time. Make mistakes. One thing that I love to study is the literature on learning, educational psychology. One of the things we've learned about learning is that if you can take the pressure off, you're going to learn a lot faster. In fact, if we give you permission, even encouragement to make mistakes, you're going to learn even faster still. So don't worry about making mistakes. I want you to jump in and thrash around and try stuff out. And remember, MA doesn't mean you have to change your whole communicational style. Use the stuff that still works for you. Don't try to do something completely artificial for you. But we're going to invite you to try some of these principles, incorporate them into your natural style. You're still going to be you, and it's okay to not do it perfectly. If you're not too hung up about doing it perfectly, you're going to have more fun, and you're going to learn how to do it faster. Great. So, next step. What I'd like each of you to do is create an MOC description. I want you to create, now, this can be an MOC that you're going to be lobbying. If you know your MOC, if you know a little bit about them, use them as your MOC description. And you're going to be able to play this person today in role play. You may also be able to share your little description with one of your group members, and we can reverse the role play, and you get to practice with somebody who's role playing your MOC, but you have to tell them a little bit about how to play. It's very simple. So I'm going to take about 3 minutes here, and each one of you pull out a piece of paper. If you're so tech-savvy, you don't bring a paper, you can do it on your laptop or your cell phone, just type it in. If you'd like to, you can use a pseudonym. Made up name for your MOC, because sometimes we realize we're going to be role-playing things that aren't very flattering. We want to be kind to our MOCs. Feel free to use a pseudonym if you'd like to. Indicate if they're a senator or representative. I'd like you to rate their friendliness to carbon fee and dividend on a 0 to 10 scale, just to kind of help people know where they're at. Are they a pre-contemplator? That would be a 1, 2, maybe a 3. Or are they fully on board? That would be an 8, 9, or 10. Most of them are going to be somewhere in between. Just pick a number that you think represents how friendly they are. Send to the Bipartisan Climate Caucus, 0 to 10. How open are they? If they're already on it, give them a 10. Number 4, committee memberships, pet projects, interesting facts about this person. If you don't know your MOC well enough, make that up. It's perfectly fine. We're just practicing here, after all. Number 4, we said what? Number 5, personality, values, or interests. If you want to use a few descriptive adjectives, have they got a good sense of humor? Are they laid back? Are they intense? Just a descriptor or two of what kind of personality you see them as having. And any specific values you know that they have. Are they really into social justice? Are they into something else that may not be CF&D related, but is still pertinent? Number 6, what are your immediate goals in lobbying this person? And you could just put a few words like CF&D support is the main thing you're after. Maybe they're not ready for that. Maybe you're just going to talk about other facts, getting them to accept a little follow-up information on the running report or something much simpler if they're really early in the stages of change. So just take I'll give you another 60 seconds to fill that in, preferably on paper. In fact, it'd be good if it's on an individual piece of paper that you could hand to one of your other group members so they've got a little script. Now I tell you, oh geez, sorry folks, I should have told you that earlier. But as long as you can hand that page to them so they can see that as a script, that would be handy, if it's possible. Make your triad member's job a little bit easier. Take about another 60 seconds, assembling that. Is that now? See you later. Feel free to ask questions, because if you're confused, others are too. Yes.
So, for example, my guy is on the CSC, but that doesn't mean he's,
Fully on board.
yeah.
you may make a note of that to help your partner out.
I expect to meet with a staff member.
Use that person if it's a staffer. That's a great point. If you're going to meet with a staffer, feel free to use the staffer as the person that you describe here. It helps.
At the moment, we're
Just writing a few of these descriptive details to remind you of how you're going to play this person. They could be a staffer, member of Congress, and also just enough descriptive information. You could hand that to another group member and they can play that person. Gives them a little bit of a script to go by. Let's take another 30 seconds. Any colorful, juicy details are fun too. Make it come to life.
Can you say not indicted yet?
Try not to be too mean. If you have to say some mean things that just are true that we need to be prepared to deal with, I would recommend using a pseudonym for this person because we don't want to do any character assassination here. Here, we're always trying to be respectful, even when it's hard. Okay, let's wrap that up. So, next item. We are ready to dive into that first skill set. So for those of you who would like to follow along, that handout that I gave you earlier, we're going to follow that handout sequence pretty much as you see it. Are there any leftover handouts, by the way? I should probably have one of those just to make sure I'm on track with everybody else. Thank you. So, the first skill set is really an attitude. Because if you try to do MI and you're technically good with it, but your attitude stinks, it ain't going to work. Because your attitude shows. PACE is this acronym we use to identify the 4 attitudes that make up the attitude of MI that makes it work. The first attitude is one of partnership. We want to see that this person across from us, no matter who they are, member of Congress, staffer, fellow CCL member, this may be your spouse or your child. Like I say, I'm serious. This works as well at home as it does anywhere else. It's about effective communication. It works better if you see that person as a partner that you're trying to collaborate with. We want to see ourselves as a team of individuals with a common set of values and goals. And we're going to be looking for those common goals. We'll have some exercises to help you find what those common goals are a little later. A stands for acceptance. And there's really 4 A's in our acceptance. We really like to show absolute worth, which is non-conditional caring. That, I know, is hard because some of these people are hard to feel unconditional caring for. But I'll give you some tips on how to do that. Accurate empathy, both stated and implied. We do that through reflective listening. That skill's coming up. We'll give you tools on how to do that kind of empathy. Autonomy, we always recognize the other person can and will do whatever they want to do. Let's be clear, folks. We don't have a lot of direct control over others, and they don't have it over us too, thankfully, but we have to be respectful of that. And then the last one, we want to affirm their strengths versus criticizing them. This is built right into our CCL format. Every lobby meeting has an appreciator in it. Somebody who's going to go to the trouble of identifying things, even in the most recalcitrant member of Congress, or his staffer, or their team, that we can identify with and say, and this has to be genuine. Genuine appreciation is so important. And we'll show you how to come up with that stuff. C stands for compassion. We want to show an active understanding of the other person's thoughts, feelings, values, and circumstances, which, by the way, makes that empathy a lot easier, and that acceptance. Evocation. This is probably the weirdest one. You may not have heard of evocation before. It comes from the word evoke, which means to draw out of. So unlike a lot of other communication systems, our model is not to stuff ideas and compel people to think the way we do. Instead, we're going to draw their wisdom out. This is an aspect of MI that is truly atypical. It's paradoxical. And it takes a little getting used to, but it's one of the reasons it works so much better than that traditional set of techniques. We want to help them find their reasons for cooperating with us. Blaise Pascal, famous French scientist, said, humans are much better persuaded by the ideas that arise from their own minds than from the minds of another. That's what this is about. If we can build a case using their ideas and their values, it's much more likely to stick, and we're going to avoid a lot of resistance. And of course, to do this, we need to help them see how our proposal serves their values. So, it turns out our attitudes show. How many of you have seen the show Lie to Me? Lie to Me. You've seen it. It hasn't been around for a while. It's based on a true story of a scientist, Emmons, I think is his name. It starts with an E, I can't remember now, out of UCLA, I believe, who studies micro-expressions. And what his research has shown is you can tell when people are lying because as soon as you ask them a question and they start to answer, the first 15 milliseconds their face gives away whether they're lying or not. Most of us can't see what's happening in 51,000ths of a second. But a slow motion, high-speed camera can. And that's what he does. He interviews people with a high-speed camera on them that can slow the motion down to see what did their facial muscles do during those first 50 milliseconds. And there are tells, whether they're lying or not. And it's quite reliable, as it turns out. So we can override what our emotions are telling us to do, but there's a lag time, and some of us are much better at that than others. So, what's the implication for MI? What we want to do is get our attitude straight, because faking it doesn't work so well. You really want to develop a genuine respect for the person you're dealing with, whoever they are, whether this is your 14-year-old, your spouse, or your congressperson. So we're going to talk about how to do this. Without that, we are going to be engaging in what this slide calls emotional leakage. How many of you recognize the actress there? Julia Roberts. Do you notice something different about her smile in frame 1 versus frame 2? Which of those would you say is a little bit more genuine? Which one looks more like a smile for a portrait versus one that looks like it was a spontaneous smile? The one on the right looks more spontaneous to you? This is weird. I've had lots of audiences have a difference of opinion. If you notice, the smile on the right is what we call a Duchenne smile. It has a name. The researcher who first studied this was a French physician in the mid-1800s by the name of Duchenne, and what he noticed is that when people spontaneously smile, not for a photograph, that there are a number of facial muscles that are recruited into the smile that don't get recruited into a portrait smile. And the key ones are the orbicularis oris, which is this muscle that causes your eye to squint, and you get the little squiggly lines at the outside of the eyes, and you'll see more of those in the second frame than you do the first. The second face, or the second smile by Julia, is a bit more of a true Duchenne smile. So why do we share this with you? It's just an illustration to show that our emotions are showing, and our attitudes are showing. So we really want to get to a good place before we start communicating with somebody. And that means sometimes some real attitude change. But how the heck are you going to change your own attitude about this person? I suggest a visit to the Hokey Pokey Clinic. Why do we call this the Hokey Pokey Clinic? How many of you, now, I'm going to have you raise your hands if you know or remember the Hokey Pokey. I am amazed. We have some people under 30 that raise their hands. Because this is not commonly taught to a new generation. The older generation got a lot of hokey pokey, I've noticed. And yes, there's a key phrase in the song Hokey Pokey where you turn yourself about. In fact, you do it physically. It's one of those action songs when you were a kid. In some cases, we have to turn our attitude about before we start lobbying. And there are ways to do this, as it turns out. So I like to affectionately refer to this as the Hokey Pokey Clinic. And sometimes we have to do this in the last 15 minutes before we step into a congressperson's office or their staffer's office. Because how many of you have been in this position? I have. You're going in to lobby a member of Congress, and your group is talking trash about them all the way there. Can you believe they did this? Oh, if you think that's crazy, look at this. What kind of frame of mind is that going to put you into? You're all fired up about how stupid and idiotic they are, and you have to go in and put on your fake smile. That's risky. So I'm going to suggest that you do a little Hokey Pokey Clinic to turn your attitude around before you get into good MI. So What does this mean? It means we're going to work to develop those PACE factors individually and as a team when we do our work. Here's the first one. This is an activity for you. By the way, you may have noticed the green slides mean you do something. The tan slides mean I do a demonstration, and the rest are informational. So here's a green slide. You're going to do something here. What I'd like you to do on paper is list 3 of your anger buttons, especially if you can with the member of Congress or the staff member that you've listed. If you don't have a specific person in mind, list the ones that most commonly come up for you that get in the way of lobbying. It could be flat-out climate denial, condescension, being distractive, getting defensive. Those are some examples of things you might list. What ticks you off? What punches your anger button when it comes to this kind of work?
Are we, when we write down, are we the person, say, we're talking to, or are we ourselves?
Yourself now. What ticks you off and gets you angry when you're talking to that person you listed a little while ago? What is it that they do that ticks you off?
Should we put it on the same piece of paper that we wrote the?
You can, but it doesn't matter in this case. These are what we call your hot buttons. What gets you hot? Take another few seconds. And then I'm going to invite some of you to share your hot buttons so that we can practice with them. Because I'll bet if you have a hot button, somebody else has the same one. I probably do. Okay, what are some of your hot buttons? Let's share a few. Over here. Pessimism on the part of that other person. What else? Good.
Whataboutism, particularly in regards to other countries.
Oh, tell us a little more about the whataboutism that ticks you off.
Like just saying, okay, well, what about what China's doing, or what about India? It doesn't matter what we do here, and that really upsets me because it goes against my value of personal responsibility. And so I think, I'm really proud to be an American, and I want us to take personal responsibility and leadership. So that's the huge hot button.
What aboutism? I love that name too. By the way, this fellow I chatted with right before this meeting started in this room, he didn't know what about. He said, but what about China? Look what they're doing. And I think I share that hot button with you. Yes.
And the racism, I guess it.
Talk about the racism. What forms do you see it popping up?
No, I just mean well, what about China?
Yeah, in that form right there. Good point.
I'm from Sacramento, California, and California has been in a drought for so many years, and so many people don't see the connection to climate change.
So people not seeing what seems pretty obvious to you. Hot button there. Here. Oh, pink shirt and then to you.
Folks that get a large amount of money from fossil fuel interests.
Seeing the behind-the-scenes money and how that seems to drive opinions. Yeah. Claiming it's fake science. Ooh, that's one of my hot buttons too. Back here in the black shirt, or whatever shirt.
Relate that, just rejection of scientific authority.
Just rejection. Yeah, can't trust those scientists. One last one over here.
Being jerked off, like say, oh yes, of course, this is very important, and nothing ever happens.
They just are yes sirs, and then you don't see any action. Just blowing smoke.
Yeah.
Okay, one last one back there.
Not answering the question that you asked, like changing topics.
Is this a politician we're talking about? Yes, very frustrating. So, you've got a good flavor. In fact, as you listen to these, you might go, oh, that's one for me too. I heard a couple of mine in here. So feel free to add some of those others if they do pertain to you too. So these are the ones we have to work on. Much of MI is working on ourselves before we work on the other person. So our next activity is going to be to help you cope with these anger buttons so they don't get in the way of doing good work. The first one is what we call an if-then plan. So I'll give you an example. If they are denying climate change, you're going to run into this a lot, you could say, what would help you get around that so that you don't just get stuck in the anger about that? For me, it might be ask more about their view. In fact, that's what I did with this fellow right before our meeting today. It was clear he did not want to hear much of anything I had to say. He had a very strong agenda. He wanted to share that agenda with me. And let me show you something later in the presentation that stops dead horse beatings. Here's what I mean by a dead horse beating. Maybe I don't have to explain it. You're chuckling already. Of course you're running into people who feel they have to beat the dead horse. This gentleman had a dead horse he wanted to beat for me, which was, well, several of them. You can't trust scientists, and you know, did he tell me he did his own research? Yeah, I did. I told someone with this, he put a stake out on the beach and he checked it for a room and conclusion in their eyes. Yeah, I told you that part. So, of course, I'm going to take strong exception to information like this, but if I oppose it directly, all you get is a ping pong match going. He's not listening to me. I'm really not interested in listening to him. Let's be honest. I have to say I'm in the same boat. I find his opinion ridiculous. I'll admit that. But we're wasting time, mine and his. And time is precious. We don't have 30 years to get this done. So what I suggest you do in a case like that is you move to reflective listening, which is what I did with him, and we're going to show you some tricks on how to do that. But in this case, ask more questions about their view. That's a way to do it. In fact, that's exactly what I did with him. I said, what would you suggest we do? Now, because it really can end the dead horse beating. Let them say what they need to say. In fact, and then reflect it back, which I'll show you how to do that too. It really can shut people down that just need to beat a dead horse with you. And even if they're in really early pre-contemplation and you're not going to budge them much right now, at least you've left without ticking them off. Because if you leave them with a sour taste in their mouth, you've missed a window of opportunity to open the door just a tiny bit wider. And that's our goal always. Even if you've got a pre-contemplator, let's see if we can nudge them up towards contemplation at least. Question? Oh, that's a good question. That's a special case. If you didn't hear a question, does that apply when you're on camera? It might go out to the general public. That's a special case. Really what I think you need to do there so that you don't let the other person dominate the conversation is show respect. Show respect for what they said, and then make sure you get a chance to very quickly, this is where your laser talks are so helpful. You're going to have to use a laser talk. You're down to laser points because media tends to go by sound bites. So make sure you know what your message is. Don't let them distract. Don't let yourself get drawn into conflict in a short span of time like that. That's not going to make good TV footage. Instead, make sure you get your message out there. I think is the best thing you can do under those very brief conditions. Yes?
I'm not quite sure where exactly this fits, but it may fall a bit in the previous question, but I've been in more than one meeting where some topic is raised and the politician just goes on not a rant, they just spend the next 15 minutes telling me about how great their program is on the relevant topic, or, oh, speaking of Africa, do you know what we're doing about TB in Africa? Like,
off topic.
And then the 20 minutes is done.
It's gone. In fact, we're going to be coming to it, so I'm going to hold this question because we have a section on focus. How do you achieve focus? That's a real important point because you're giving us great examples, both of you, of how people drag the focus way afield of where we want it to be. So we're going to get to focus in a little bit. So in this case, what I'd like you to do is make an if-then plan. More examples. If they're condescending, you might ask them to enlighten us. In fact, I did that with this fellow today. I said, what are your suggestions about how we should respond to the situation? Distraction. If that's what they're doing, you might want to acknowledge what they're doing, because if you don't acknowledge it, it turns into a dead horse beating. And we're going to show you how to powerfully acknowledge, so powerfully, it really shuts most people down on the dead horses. Yes?
Excuse me if you already said it, but the gentleman who had the stake asked him to enlighten you. If he already said there's a problem because the ocean is not rising, how did he enlighten you that climate change, what did he say after he said the stake? Is that there's no climate change?
It's a good question. For those of you who couldn't hear, what did I do with the gentleman who said he had solved the problem by putting a stake in the beach and monitoring it for a year? This fellow is what we would call deeply in pre-contemplation. He's about as far from being friendly to climate change or anything to do about it as I can imagine. So he's about a 0.5 on the 0 to 10 scale. What I'm going to suggest is you have to be very, again, it comes back to a question of time. Elections are frequently won by the vote, first of all, the people who vote. So you've heard this somewhere else. Shocking news, isn't it? I think that's really cool. And number two, it's the ones that you can shift. Those are typically the people that are not pre-contemplators. They're not contemplators. They're in preparation. They have ambivalence. They're the fence sitters. The more of those fence sitters that you can tilt over, that's where your efforts are probably going to have the biggest impact, the biggest short-term impact. In the long term, yes, nudging pre-contemplators and contemplators further and further over, that is helpful. We always want to do that. But I don't want to waste too much time with this gentleman. I'm sorry. He's a lovely fellow. He has good reasons for his beliefs. I'm not going to change those in a 10-minute conversation when I have a presentation coming up. So you have to be very wise in how you spend your time. If you have crazy Uncle Harry, maybe the way you're going to use him more with Uncle Harry is to at least acknowledge his viewpoints, see if he's interested in hearing any of yours. If he is not, great, it's time to talk about the cranberry sauce at dinner. So use this to simply stop the waste of time if it's somebody who's a deep pre-contemplator. And if you've got a chance to nudge them a little bit in the right direction in the process, wonderful. If you leave friends, you have accomplished something. If you simply prove to them that those climate change people are a bunch of crazy science-loving, godless whatevers, we haven't helped ourselves much. So we try to leave the relationship in the best condition possible, no matter what. And I think I did that with this fellow. We left off on a positive note.
You referred to him as a pre-contemplator, but it would seem to me that if someone has gone to the effort of placing a stake in the beach and watching it for a year, that they are contemplating it, that they're perturbed, they're challenged, and so they're probably a lot closer to be able to make a change than somebody that
didn't even put a stake in the beach. That's a good point. I think your point is very well taken, because this fellow, I have to give him some credit. He went out and put a stake in the beach and bothered to come back and check it with me over the period of a year. Now, I've had multiple courses at the doctoral level in research methodology, and we could have had a long and fruitless discussion, I might add, on his methods. So I wasn't going to go there, because I'm not going to share my knowledge on research methodology in 10 minutes. So you're right. I think you're right, though. He went a little further along, and so for that reason, I really did want to give him at least 10 minutes. That's probably what we spent tops. And hopefully, if nothing else, leave him with a feeling that as climate change believers and the folks that want to do something about it, that we don't have horns. We're kind people. We're people that you can get along with, that you can have a conversation without coming to fisticuffs. If I left him with no more than that, I'm pretty happy. Given where he is, whether he's a pre-contemplator, maybe a contemplator. I think you're persuading me on that, because he did expend that kind of effort. But that's what I'd suggest with these folks that you're going to run into. Be conservative with your time. Be wise with the use of your time. We want to spend it where it's going to do the most good. So take a few minutes, write 3 if-then plans, like the kind you see here. If they do this, what are you going to do? And then we're going to share those. I'm going to give you about, some of you have already started, I noticed, good for you. Take about another 60 seconds. I'll time it up here, and then let's talk about your if-then plans. Do we have 2 other working ones yet?
Yeah.
Do you want to just double check and see if they got, because they died after we got them going.
Okay.
Way to go, baby. Okay, let's do a little sharing. Who would be willing to share one of their if-then plans with us? Over there.
Sure. I have a conservative Republican who's on the caucus who has been really genuine and wonderful with high school students on one meeting, but in many other meetings tends to evade and talk circuitously. So my thoughts are, if he is avoiding a direct answer, my impression is that he does that when he doesn't feel safe and he feels like he's on display. So I think what I will try to do is say, Representative so-and-so, I really want to understand what your thoughts are about carbon fee and dividend. Please know that everything here is confidential. If I heard you correctly, this is what I thought, this is what I think you said, and try to reflect it back. That's my thought.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a good example of reflective listening, which we're going to dive into in some detail here. Nice.
So I was thinking that if somebody is kind of overwhelmed with the research, so they're kind of panicking, that maybe you can break it down into one of the laser talks that just talk about some of the general effects of climate change so they don't feel panicked.
So think about how much we have to wrap our heads around with this stuff. Imagine those poor Congress people. That sounds like a nice way to simplify it for them and respond accordingly.
Now, I don't mean to repeat too much of what I said before, but with the whataboutism, I was thinking that similar, like tapping into the reasons that it bothers me, I could try to appeal to their better nature by saying, you know, I understand that other countries have a long way to go, but we do as well. And I want us to be leaders, and I know you want us to be a leader as well. And I know you want us to take responsibility as well.
Thank you for that one, Rebecca. Yes, anytime you can ascribe their behavior to positive values, watch them perk up. When you can also just as easily ascribe that behavior to negative values. There's a principle that's been well established in psychology called the fundamental attribution error. Look it up online sometime. I won't go into detail, but you're tapping into it right there. We tend to attribute the bad behaviors of others, or the behaviors we judge negatively, to character flaws. But when we make mistakes and do bad things, we tend to say it was situational. But we reverse it when we've done the opposite is true for good things. When other people do things that are good, we tend to say, well, it was situational. Or luck, for example, is a situational variable. But when we do it, it's because of our positive character traits. So we have to, that's a nice job that I think you've done there to overcome the fundamental attribution error. Let's pick one more. Somebody from over here?
Well, I have a question. How are you gaining any ground by asking more about their view when they're denying the science or climate change?
So don't ask a question that you don't want the answer to. Is a good rule of thumb. But there are some exceptions to that. So I appreciate that question. Here's the exception to it. If this is turning into a dead horse beating, you can tell they are trying to convince you that here's my plan on this. If you detect it's because they don't think you've heard them or understood them, that's where reflective listening is very helpful. It will shut that process off. When we get to reflective listening, which is coming right up, I'll do a demonstration of that. In fact, would you like to play a person who's doing that when that demonstration comes up, and I'll do that with you? Thank you. We'll do a live one on that. That's a great thing to practice. So, what do I hear?
Can I clarify what you just said?
Sure.
So are you saying that when somebody is beating a dead horse, if you ask them more about their view, that tends to stop the beating? Is that what you said?
If you ask them about that and then do a very good reflective listening along with it. So it's not just the asking about it. There has to be reflective listening, which we're going to get to because we're coming up to the very section in your handout that discusses that. We'll demo that for you. Back here.
Maybe I'm jumping in too, but here's where I struggle. If I'm describing myself as a scientist in the conversation, and they start talking about sticks in the sand, I fear that if I reflect that back to them, they'll take that as accepting their scientific research. And I really struggle with that.
You do. Maybe like I do. And I'm not the kind of scientist you are, probably. Yes. So you don't want to give the impression that you're accepting, but here's the subtle difference. When we reflectively listen to others, we are showing understanding, which is not acceptance. We will never give the impression we're accepting. I'm going to show you how to do this, because we've got someone who just volunteered to do a role play with me, and I think she's going to be pretty good at it, because it sounds like she's had a fair bit of experience with these kind of folks. And what I'm going to try to do is show you how I'm going to ask questions, open questions we call them, and then I'm going to do reflective listening. And you're going to notice that I want to help her feel completely understood. In fact, I'm going to have her rate it. At periodic intervals, I'm going to have her rate from 0 to 10, how well does she feel I understand her based on what I've been saying. That's a nice luxury we have here that you don't have with Congress people, but we can do it here. And then I'm going to ask you guys, did I ever say I agreed with anything she was saying? You listen carefully, and I'm going to make sure I don't say anything that suggests that I agree 1 iota with her. So you'll watch how this happens, and I think it'll address your concern there, because that's a valid concern. Anyone else? Yes?
Yeah, well, hey, I'm struggling with something. I have a conservative Republican who's on the caucus, but his main thrusts are national security and creating jobs. And he does not see that there's a connection with some of the solutions to climate change and those issues. And so my being scientific background, I want to throw facts at him, but I know I shouldn't do that. So trying to, but what do I say then?
Yes.
So
Yes.
in this scenario, I've kind of come up with asking him when he gives me, that those, to ask him what he figures success in national security is, to try to find out what he measures or what.
Oh, I think you're on the right track.
Okay.
In fact, when we get to that later in the presentation, you're going to see it I had on your handout. It's called BARNCAT. We have a set of techniques represented by the acronym BARNCAT for just that situation. So you watch, and if that doesn't answer your question, after we do BARNCAT, let me know and we'll go into it in more depth. Last one right here. Here.
The scenario where the person says, oh, well, we'd like to do more about that, but we're just constrained because the Republicans have the majority, or I can't get anybody to pair up with me to join the climate caucus, or so when they put obstacles in front of the ask that you're not really sure are legitimate.
Whew, great question. That too is going to be helped by BARNCAT, but I have a whole section of points on how to deal with defensiveness and resistance. It's not on your handout, but many of your questions I can see today are really hitting the defensiveness and resistance. So here's what I'm going to encourage us to do. I'm going to push a little faster through the content that you got on your handout so that we can reserve some time toward the end so that we can get into dealing. And I'll show you a set of skills that are not on that handout because it wouldn't hold them all, frankly. And I like to keep it simple for this presentation, but I'll show you those. You can jot them down. I'll try to include those in the package that you're going to get. There are 12 specific skills for dealing with resistance and defensiveness. I think you'll find them useful. Okay, moving right along. Thank you for your comments thus far. So, ifs and plans are a great way to get ready for difficult situations. Here's another option. You can reframe your negative attitude of the other person. Here's some quick examples. You can write your negative, in fact, here's what I'm going to invite you to do. Write one of your negative attitudes about this person you're going to be working with on your paper. What's one negative thought or one negative belief you have about them? We all have them. Then I'd like you to write a more objective view, take that very same idea and see if you can reframe it. What does reframing mean? For example, think in shades of gray instead of black and white, if that's pertinent. Or find a more compassionate view of them. In fact, that fundamental attribution error problem we had a minute ago is an example of that. And it's a way to see it from their perspective, by putting yourself in their shoes. So one negative attitude you have about the person and one reframe. Take about 60 seconds to draft one of those up, and then let's share those and see what we can learn from each other. Yes. We'll take our first break in 10 minutes, by the way, in case your physiological needs are crying out. Take another 10 seconds on that. All right, let's share some reframes right here.
Okay, can I use real names?
If it's not pejorative, if we don't cast anybody in a negative light.
This is Senator Bill Nelson, Florida.
Okay.
He's an environmentalist. He's talking on the floor of the Senate about all the problems, and I can't get him to commit on carbon fee and dividend. I can't get him to commit, or his staff to commit on solutions.
Yes.
He's up against President Governor Scott, who's a Tea Party member, is running against Senator Nelson in Florida for the Senate seat.
Gotcha.
Okay? So he's got a question. Does he go for carbon fee and dividend for a solution that he could be attacked on? Or does he just continue to point out the problems? And I said, Senator, you were an astronaut. You were in the Army. You're brave. It's time to be brave on this. Maybe take a chance. Maybe take a chance and get the people behind you on this, on the solutions, to be a leader on solutions.
Yeah, so let me see if I understand. What do you hear in this reframe that he's proposing? On the first blush, it looks like the guy is being a chicken. But you're reframing it as what? Bravery. That's a reframe. You can take one thing. The classic illustration of this is Tom Sawyer, if you remember reading that. Remember Tom Sawyer while watching the fence? How did he get his buddies to help him? He didn't frame it as a job. It's fine as a privilege. In fact, you're going to have to pay me your best marble if I'm going to let you do 10 feet of it. And he had all of his buddies out there painting it. Reframes can be quite powerful. There's one. What else? Who else would like to share one?
I think I'm going to ask for help from people because I won't name a name because this is not very positive about our person, but he assaulted a reporter and was put into jail. I mean, he was booked and has a mugshot. But anyway, so I sort of hold it against him because he threw the guy down and punched him. He lied about it, but he was caught on Fox's News tape, but anyway, so you couldn't lie about it. But so I said, against him, so it's hard to, like, so I was trying to think, well, I guess it's hard when you feel people are out to get you, and you've been really tired from campaigning, and they push you over the edge. I don't know.
So that it's very easy to have a pejorative interpretation of a behavior of this sort. Who wouldn't among us go, he did what? But what I like about what you did there is you found other explanations. It's not that it exonerates this person. But you know, there's great research on this, by the way. Have you heard of the term hangry? A guy from Utah, a researcher who's now at the University of Iowa, has done research on hangry, and it's a real thing. Laboratory research shows that if your blood sugar goes low, spouses will get far feistier with each other in discussions than if their blood sugar is at a normal level. So blood sugar, being tired, being fatigued, we have research on this too. It literally reduces our inhibitions. And we're all likely to behave not so well if we get into one of those situations. Does it exonerate us? No. But what I like about what you did there is you're seeing a different side. And if you run into this person and try to lobby with them, and you have this deeply angry attitude and pejorative attitude about them, how would that not get in the way of trying to deal with them respectfully? So I like the way that you put a different twist, you reframe that. Let's do one more over here.
So I had a situation in which my member called us after the shootings in Florida and asked me to arrange a meeting with the high school students and him to talk about gun violence, which I was thrilled about. Even though we're supposed to stay focused, I decided it would build the relationship, and I set up the meeting. When he was in the meeting, he really did not listen to the students very well at all, and I was so deeply, deeply disappointed. But I have tried really hard to reframe that, thinking, because I've seen him do this over and over again, if he thinks he's talking publicly, if he thinks he's talking to a large group of people that he doesn't know, he stays very much on party line. If he's in a small group that he feels that he can trust, he tends to act with more integrity, in my opinion. And so that's how I'm trying to reframe it. I may be crap, I don't know.
Here's how you know if it's crap. Does it work for you? If If it's working for you, that's all that matters, because this is for you. This is your benefit. It's to help us get into a better place before we dive into the work with these people, because if we have deeply held negative views of them, oh, that's going to make it hard. It's hard for us. This is actually for our benefit, to help us get into a good place so that we can negotiate and work collaboratively in the best conditions possible. One more over here.
Yeah, I have a question. I think I had a breakthrough here, but I want to know from you if I'm completely full of it. So I was thinking about our friend with the stick. I'm fixated on it.
You know that stick story.
Yeah, and so I was trying to ascribe a positive character trait to putting the stick in the sand. And I realized that to do that, I have to make a lot of assumptions about it. I had to assume a positive character trait. And I was like, I'm not going to assume. And if I go to him and say, well, obviously that's because you believe in duh, and if I'm making that, he'll know if I've made that up, especially if I'm wrong. So does it work to simply assume that there is a positive character trait somewhere underlying it and ask them what that is?
Or to ask them what the positive side of that is?
What if it's positive and then say, wow, I think it's great that you are trying to answer this question of yourself. What inspired you to do that?
I love that. Because there you don't even have to say you believe it's positive, although you gave that implication that you see some benefit in it. But this is never about being disingenuous yourself. You really have to find something that you say, yeah, I could see that side to it. Maybe it's not strong evidence, but it's enough to help me open my attitude up and open some compassion for this person. So, I'll give you a quick example. I loved science as a kid, did 4 international science and engineering fairs while in high school. And so one of my first ones, I built a seismograph. I had an uncle who had successfully built one, and he showed me how. And I built one in the basement, and I mounted on the basement floor, a good concrete surface, had a steel cable to the ceiling, the weights, it had the slowly rotating drum, the stylus, the whole thing. And I was really happy because I came down. I live in a seismically active area, southern Utah. That's where all that crazy geography came from. And sure enough, I can see every so often there's a blip, and I'm picking up earthquakes here. I'm so excited. And then one day I'm down there and I'm taking one, you're getting close. And I'm down there and I'm just about ready to change the tape, and look, here comes an earthquake in right now. And I'm looking, the stylus is starting to bounce. And I realize my sister Carol is upstairs sitting on the toilet and just flushed it. So it wasn't, I was naive. I was naive about my ability to construct a good seismograph. But my intents were good. I really wanted to learn how to do this, and I think that's what I could see in this fellow with the sticks. I could say, I am so impressed, and I genuinely am, that how many people, I could say honestly, would go to the bother of taking stakes, meticulously placing them in the beach sand, coming back, recording where the tides were hitting them, the high tides, which is what he was doing. I am so impressed. Somebody, a citizen, would want to go out and collect data. That shows a respect for science, even though his methods, of course, are very sketchy. We're not going to go there. What you do with this is you always want, this is the appreciation that we do when we go into our MOC's office, that CCL has us do. That appreciation is where we find something genuine that we can compliment and affirm in that other person. And I realize sometimes we're going to have to scratch really deep to find it. And that's okay. We need to do that. That's the point. So, in the interest of time, we are now at 3:28. That's roughly an hour and a half into a 3-hour presentation. We're going to 5:15, so I think this is a good time. Let's take a 15-minute break. I'm going to ask that you be back here at 3:45 in 15 minutes, ready to roll. Well, we're going to go ahead and jump back in. Our next section, if you're following on our handout, is the 4 processes. I'm going to cruise through this fairly quickly because I'm getting the sense that you guys would really like to get to those how to deal with defensiveness and resistance ideas that are kind of the bonus if we have time at the end. So I'm going to hustle it up, but I do want to still answer your questions adequately as we go through these. 4 processes. Think of this as the developmental sequence that we go through. For some of the people that you're dealing with, you've already engaged. You're going to be able to go right on to focusing the conversation, evoking change talk. You'll see how to do that. Planning is where we get, that's our ask. And if we've already got a person to the stage where we can get an effective ask, that's going to be great. So let's take a look at what you do at each of these stages to keep things moving. So our 4 processes, think of them as 4 stairs. You really can't move to the next one until you've done a good job with one before it. Engaging means that we're going to establish the working relationship. We've been in some of these congressional offices for 10 years now, and we have a very good working relationship. So that step has been done in some cases. For others, a new member of Congress, not so much. You'll have to do some engaging. Focusing is where we clarify the agenda. We want to make sure we don't get pulled off into the weeds. Focusing keeps us where we need to be. Evoking is where we elicit their reasons for change. Now we're moving them through those stages of change, getting them moving from contemplation up to preparation or hopefully action. And planning, of course, is where we develop and commit to a plan of action. That's the ask, and hopefully we get a yes to it, and then we can start moving and taking action on that. How do you do that? Here's some ideas that MI offers. For engagement, Robbers Cave study. If any of you have had introductory psychology or sociology, you have heard this study. It's one of the most famous studies in all of psychology. It was conducted in 1954. One of my professors, you can see on the book there, it's B. Jack White, was one of the research assistants and publishers of this study. And I had the good fortune to take the class from him. It was conducted at the Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. And here's how it relates to motivational interviewing. They were studying how do you get collaboration and cooperation among individuals that hate each other's guts. Something that we might learn from. They had 2 Boy Scout troops, and the camp leaders were not really camp leaders. They were sociologists studying their behavior, but with their parents' permission. The parents knew, but the kids didn't. And once these kids were ready to kill each other, which, by the way, we don't do studies like this ethically anymore, so it's probably the last time we're going to get to see what happens. They found something interesting. After creating a lot of competition, these kids were highly antagonistic towards each other. And then the question was, how can you break down antagonism and confrontation? And they had 3 weeks to do it during a summer camp. Here's what they learned, and it's been validated by many subsequent studies. They found cooperation requires superordinate goals. They tried a number of things. They tried getting an external enemy. They tried a number of things that didn't work, and this is the one that seemed most reliable. What did they do to find this, or to determine this? They sabotaged the camp's water system. They jammed it, they plugged it, nobody was getting a shower, there was barely enough water to get by. Everybody, both Boy Scout troops, were in deep doo-doo, and they were hurting. And the camp leader said, you know, we've found where the problem is, the system is jammed, but it's going to take all of us working for a few days to get this thing unjammed and get our water running. And that is what we call a superordinate goal. It's one that was valuable to both groups, that transcended their individual interests. And lo and behold, over a period of a few days, these kids came together. You can see him, that's my professor down there at the bottom, Jack White, posing as a camp counselor. But these kids came together to fix that water system. And they, by the end of the camp, had become fast friends. In fact, one group who had won money at the expense of the other group in a previous competition voted to use their money to buy milkshakes for everybody on the way home. Hopefully we get to the milkshake level at CCL.
Milkshakes for everyone.
Milk fags! So, how do you find these superordinate goals and values? In our case, I'm going to give you some hints. Number one, you've got tons of notes that your predecessors in these congressional offices have taken. Benefit from those. Those are available. That's why we keep them. You can go to the congressperson's website and see what they've been saying they care about. Go to the media, see what they've been saying publicly lately. And finally, talk to your fellow CCL members who have lobbied this office before and know this person personally. How about Republicans, though? How do you do this with Republicans? Now, we are bipartisan, but we know that sometimes Republicans are a little harder to persuade on some of these issues. Not all of them. Let's not stereotype, but there are some that are going to have some issues with this, given their platforms and such. What I'm going to do is give you some hints on how to find superordinate values with some of these individuals. As an example, there are 26 common Republican values that I've scratched out of the literature over the years. And by the way, this is the most photographed slide in my presentation. Over the years, I see more people pulling their cell phones out, snapping pictures of this, so apparently people think this, well, there they go now. Because this is obviously something that some of you struggle with.
in MI, we are always looking for superordinate values. Values that we can get behind, that CF&D supports, but that will also support the values of the person sitting across from us. So this is what we're after here. And by the way, I'm probably going to taper down the question. I really love audience interaction, but I'm probably going to take a few less questions from the audience so that we can get to the end, but I do want to take a few, and I see some hands, so I'll take a couple right here. One right there.
I do have concern with this a bit because I have seen people try to do this, and it often comes across in a very disrespectful way. For instance, I would never, I've heard a lot of vegans say, you can't be an environmentalist without being vegan. Or I could think of other examples of when, and so I kind of worry about that it will come across as like trying to almost like trick them.
Absolutely.
Is that something you found that people can have?
Absolutely. Anything you do with motivational interviewing has to be done genuinely. This is not about pulling punches. This is not about trickery, because you will always get caught with that. If not now, later. People have long memories. You don't even risk that. We don't have any interest in fooling anybody. The only time you present carbon fee and dividend as serving somebody else's values is if you can make a genuine case for that. And if you know your MOC has some of these values, and you can help them see how this would serve their value legitimately, validly, for sure, by all means we do it. But we're not going to make promises we can't keep. We're not going to promise things that we shouldn't be promising. So this is always, everything we do with MI is 100% honest and genuine. We don't fudge. We stay honest. So one more, and actually I'd like to draw a few more people into the conversation that we haven't had participating. We've got some very active responders up here. Are there any comments from back there? Because I want to make sure we give everybody a chance to get in the conversation. Okay, one more. Oh, right over here. Here's a new person. Yes. Well, I'll tell you. In fact, I'm going to show you an example of how a bunch of scruffy kids from Utah did it with our Utah Congress. And I've got that slide coming right up. And it's about sustainability. And it's with Republicans. And it's kind of a fun story. So we'll get to that story. Tell me if your question doesn't get answered by that story. Oh, it's here. Here it is. This appeared on CNN 2 weeks ago, Dave? Yeah. 2 weeks ago. How a group of teenagers convinced the Utah legislature to recognize climate change. Now, this has been all over the media. Bernie Sanders has commented on this. By the way, that's my daughter on the far right. She's the president of her high school environmental club in my hometown, Logan. And these kids said they were offended because they realized that the state of Utah 10 years ago made this resolution on the left. This resolution urges the United States Environmental Protection Agency to immediately halt its carbon dioxide reduction policies and programs and withdraw its endangerment finding and related regulations until a full and independent investigation of climate data and global warming science can be substantiated. That's what was on the books in 2010 in Utah. Now, that's a shortened version of the larger document. This is what passed and what you saw our governor signing off on 2 weeks ago. Here's the 2018 resolution. Now, this isn't just these kids. It had a lot of backing from other people, but my daughter's trained in MI and my dad. I train high schoolers. I train adolescents in my practice. I train kids how to do this with their parents. And the parents come in and they say, can you train my other kids? I don't know what you've been teaching my kid how to do, but we're getting along a heck of a lot better than we ever have before. This is not fudging. This is genuine. It's about how to collaborate with people, even your parents and your teenagers. So here's the new resolution. It encourages the responsible stewardship of natural resources and reduction of emissions through incentives and support of the growth, sustainability. How do Republicans define it? Find out how. Growth, sustainable economy may be the thing that you want to be looking at with them. Businesses, for example, our ski industry is not sustainable in Utah. We have a huge ski industry. We're measuring snowfalls going down, down, down. That's not sustainable business and industry. So find out how they define those values, and then see if you can show how CF&D supports that. Hope that answers the question. I have highlighted terms to show how what they did, they were using MI, the people that crafted this, not just the high schoolers. Dave Fullen, right here in the red shirt, was one of the ringleaders behind the scenes. good, our CCLers were very active and a large number of people. The kids just kind of, have you ever noticed people will swallow something much better if kids are doing it? How is it they get easy, or, well, I don't know, it's not easier, but it's always good to have them in your team. Enlarge the economy. This bill acknowledges the impacts of a changing climate on Utah, encourages the use and analysis of sound science to understand the causes and impacts of local and regional climates. This is a very red state, Utah. These kids and the others, when they were trying to put this together, said, you're crazy. This is never going anywhere. And it did fail the year before. But with some tenacity, with Dave and many others behind them helping them, it passed.
Was that state or national?
This is state. This is our state. It's a state resolution. So if it can happen in Utah, red Utah, it can happen anywhere. It's these guys. I was busy teaching MI. I wasn't too much involved in this one. But anyway, this is what MI can do. It's what this set of principles can do. When you approach things in this collaborative fashion, it makes a difference. You can get people collaborating that nobody believed could collaborate. So let's help you do this now. Here's a little exercise, green slide. Write down how your goal, carbon fee and dividend, will serve 3 or more of your MOC's values. I'm going to go back to that slide if you'd like to use it as a cheat sheet. There it is. If you want to use any of those values, feel free. But see if the person that you're playing, your MOC, list some of the values that you know they have and how CF&D will serve that. Take 60 seconds to do that. Okay, let's start with those who are ready, and let's see if we can get some new people into our conversation, some that might be a little towards the back. My experience is my wife is a devout introvert, and she always sits in the back, and I know that sometimes introverts sit back there, and they are bright people. So we'd like to hear from them too. So if you're one of those, feel free to raise your hand. Let's get you into the conversation too. Oh, there's a person in the back. Introvert or otherwise, we'd love to hear from you. That's a value that you know your MOC appreciates as market-based solutions. Nice.
Reduced regulations.
Reduced regulations, and you can make a case for how CF&D reduces regulations. Anything else?
My member of Congress is a Democrat who does take national security very seriously. So I want to appeal to him maybe on the basis of national security. He understands climate change as a threat to national security, which it is.
Beautiful. And one last one there, the lady standing up.
So, my member of Congress is a progressive who has limited sort of time and resources to devote to the climate issue because of a district that is very pressed economically with a lot of vulnerable people. So I've been trying to tie together the ways in which this particular district is more vulnerable to the effects of climate change and will be better served by the progressive aspects of the dividend.
Whoa, so you're tailoring it right to this person's values in their district. That's how we do superordinate values. So I think you see the general idea here. That's how we want to be thinking as we go in. So let's now move to the next stage, which is focus. How do you get a focus going? Because many of you have raised examples of how your MOC will wander off topic, or they want to tell you about all the successes that they've had over in this area. They're really distracting you from the carbon fee and dividend discussion. Let's talk a little bit about some techniques that help focus. Focus on your goal, or you're going to end up in the weeds. And we all know what this feels like. You come out of an MOC meeting and you go, oh my gosh, we didn't really talk much about CF&D or anything else. They dominated and led us off into the weeds. And sometimes it's our own people who do this. It's us. Sometimes they get us engaged in a conversation and the clock's ticking, and before we know it, we've been off talking about something that really doesn't relate to our agenda. How do we avoid that? 3 focus points. If they're supportive, this means they're already, like this last member of Congress, they're liberal, they're progressive on climate issues. In those cases, if they're ready to, and it doesn't sound like that one's quite ready, we want to move to planning as quickly as possible. And planning is where we're going to say, how do we get you on the Climate Solutions Caucus? How do we get you actively committed to supporting CF&D and all that stuff? If they're ambivalent, let's say they're between 4 and 6 on that 10 scale, we're going to foster change talk, and that's the darn cat that you see coming up. If they're hostile, which would be a 0 to 1, that's where we're going to explore their values. We're going to use open-ended questions and reflections so we stop the dead horse beatings and we can move the conversation a little bit further. I was having this discussion with my comrade from Utah, Dave Folland, here in the red shirt during our break. There are going to be times where you really have to say, especially if you're meeting people in various contexts in your home state and elsewhere, if you're dealing with a person in the 0 to 3 range and you can see that you're just being led into the weeds and there's really no interest, we really need to conserve our energy. And if that energy is going to be better used somewhere else with somebody who's ambivalent in, say, the 4 to 6 range, and we can move them, we may want to be as polite as possible with this person that we're dealing with, recognize that there's some differences, show as much respect, affirm what we genuinely can and what they've said to leave a good flavor in their mouth, and redirect back to those people and those individuals that we can move towards the tipping point. Something to think about. And finally, the plan. Here is where the planning phase, when you get to this, and again, I realize we didn't talk much about focusing because I really want to get you to the stuff on dealing with resistance and defensiveness. When you get to the planning phase, and we could do a whole session on planning by itself, or making the ask. We want to make our ask, we want to make a proposal or an offer that serves that person's goals and values, and it has to be framed that way. Otherwise, why would they sign on? So here are some of the questions that I find useful to get a person moving in that direction. Would you be willing to? Fill in the blank. In fact, I see the cameras coming out. These are helpful sentence stems that many people find useful to forge your ask before you even get in there. So much of it is finding the right words. Sometimes just a simple sentence stem or 2 is enough to get it out there in a productive way. In fact, when I work with clients in my office who are struggling with other people, I have discovered that in many cases, one of the most productive things we can do is craft a list of a script, essentially, that helps them have something concrete to say when the most critical discussions are underway. How can we follow up, or who can we follow up with? What information would be helpful? Could we offer you more information on topic X, Y, or Z? We want to set the stage for more collaboration. And when we're here, if we can't get a yes to the ask, we want to troubleshoot to see what, and if we do get a yes to the ask, we want to do troubleshooting. We want to look for the likely things that are going to sabotage this and prepare for those. What if you get pushback from colleague X, Y, or Z, and so forth? Finally, prepare for problems with if-then plans, and we always want to thank them for what they have given you. Even if they give you a no, if they have shown respect, if they have been good at listening, if they have shown engagement, we always want to leave on a positive note and thank them for anything genuinely that they have been willing to give us during the course of that conversation. So those are a few tips from an MI perspective for your ask, or what MI calls the planning phase, the final step in these conversations. Any questions on that before we...
When you have like troubleshoot, are you talking about in the meeting troubleshooting with them collaboratively?
Yes. So for example, if they've given you a yes and they said, well, I think I will sign up on the Bipartisan Climate Caucus, we should know what are the likely things that sabotage people from saying they're going to do it to actually doing it. And so if we know from our CCL colleagues that many people get cold feet after they've made that commitment, what are the things that make them have cold feet? Can you imagine? After they've said yes, back there. They get a call from a donor. What if the funding priorities shift? So we want to prepare them for this. In my business, we call it relapse prevention. When we've got somebody free of drugs and alcohol, we want to prevent the next relapse. We don't want to just leave it there. So even though you get a yes to an ask, then you might ask them, what are some of the obstacles you foresee that could make it hard to stick with your commitment to this? Get them to tell you, because frankly, they know better what's likely coming. It's in the back of their head right now going, oh yeah, but I'm going to have to face this. And ask them what they expect will get in the way, and then you can become an active participant in game planning with them, how you can help, how we can help as an organization, help them maintain their commitment that they've made to us. One more here.
I have a very hostile person that we're going to be calling on this week who's not met with us before, and there's not really a group in that district, and some of us bordering it are trying to get to it. And I know CCL wants an ask of carbon fee and dividend or caucus, but we don't even really know what their goals are. So should we downplay our goals to just building a relationship before we even try to, you know, I mean, and some people want to ask that, but I mean, it's so far, in my mind, so far-fetched that, I mean, they were very hostile with us last year.
I think your point is really well taken, and I'm going to give you an answer that's different than CCL's, because I'm speaking as a psychologist from lots of training in motivational interviewing. We come at this from we look at what works and what doesn't in terms of asks in general. And what we find is that if a person is really early in those stages of change, if you make what for them would be an outlandish, it would be for me to ask a person who is, I have a client right now who is using nearly a lethal dose of methamphetamine every day. And to ask that person to suddenly, and they're early in the stages of change, and say, hey, can we check you into a rehab? Even though that's, of course, an obvious thing to do. It may save their life. But in terms of their stages of change, they're nowhere near that. They have had bad experiences with rehabs, They've got 50 reasons they could give me on not. So when we get into change talk, you're going to see we try to avoid asking questions that get sustained talk, which means sustaining the status quo. And I'm afraid you're asking for sustained talk there. So I might suggest picking a smaller ask, something that's more within the realm of possibility. Could we send you a copy of the REMI report? And then could we follow up with you and see if you have any questions about that? Could we send it to your staffer? We know you're busy. We'd be happy to follow up with them and answer any questions. Scale the ask down to one that you think you have a better chance of getting a yes to. We want to keep change talk going, not sustain talk, is what we call that other stuff. Great question. Moving along. Now we're really getting into some more meaty stuff. This is ORS if you're following along on the handout. If you take nothing away today, but these 4 principles, I will be happy, because this is the engine of motivational interviewing. This is the guts. Now, all the other stuff is important. It will make it work far better if you learn PACE and you know those 4 steps that we just went through, and you follow those, the developmental steps. But if you take nothing away but ORS, you will see a noticeable improvement in your relationships with the people you're working with. ORS is an acronym that stands for 4 things: open questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. Let's show you how to do them. We use open questions because they open dialogue. And this perhaps is fairly simple, but it's worth saying. A closed question is one that can be answered yes or no. It tends to curtail dialogue. An open question is one that gets people talking more, which research shows is more likely to move you towards collaboration. Think the 6 W's. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. We let how into the club, even though it's W's at the back end, because it would be very lonely and feel left out. How is it one of the 6 W's? You can ask 10 million questions with those 6 W's. So before you go into your meetings, ask yourself, what are some open-ended questions that are likely to open up the discussion with this person? And you can see they make a big difference. Sadly, many of us tend to have a habit of asking the closed-ended questions. So we're going to give you practice with this here with your triads in a minute. A stands for affirm, meaning affirm something positive about that partner you're dealing with. We have this built into our CCL agendas for lobby meetings. So you're probably used to it if you've done some of this. You can spotlight any of the following things: their actions, their abilities, their strengths, their efforts, their values, or their intentions. Anything that you can genuinely compliment, please do it. It opens up the dialogue and makes them more friendly to more movement. Reflective listening. Now, out of ORS, if you only take one thing out of ORS, this is the thing to take, is reflective listening. It's the single most powerful tool in my experience with my personal clients, with my corporate, with my other clients. This one makes more difference. If you get good at reflective listening, you'll see it open more doors than any other single skill on that sheet you have in front of you. And some of you, how many of you had training in reflective listening at some point? It's not uncommon, it's out there. I find many people who have been trained, I find fewer people who are good at it. I have to push myself to keep my skills up or I drift. Here's how it works. We want to show non-judgmental understanding of their thoughts and feelings, both pro and con to whatever it is we're talking about, both stated, that's the surface thoughts and feelings, the ones that they're talking about, as well as the ones they're not stating. Those are the implied thoughts and feelings. So at first, just worry about the superficial, the ones that are right out there in the open, but a good reflective listener is picking up on what the other person is implying as well as stating. Why do we do this? Because it helps people feel deeply understood. This is the one skill that will stop dead horse beatings faster than anything else, if anything can. And I'm not saying this always will, but it's the single most powerful tool I've ever seen for helping a person feel so understood they don't need to keep beating that dead horse. We're going to, yes?
Could also be a place that goes back to that, what was the word you used,
Superordinate goals.
Subordinate goals. You really can pick up on sort of underlying values. You can maybe back up on stuff that they're saying that you disagree with and reflect back that sort of word.
Yes, if you're a strategic reflective listener, you will hear both the values they're articulating as well as the ones they're alluding to or implying. And when you reflect those explicitly, people go, oh my gosh, this person understands me. Now, this is not the same thing as understanding, and we're going to demonstrate it here in a minute because I have a promise from this person over here. She's going to do a role play with me. Thank you. I appreciate that. And she's going to give me a little bit of trouble here because she's going to try to beat her dead horse, I think, is what she is willing to show us what happens to her. So we need to help her out with a person who beats dead horses, I think. She's had more than enough experience with that. And I'll show you how this could help. A little more on reflective listening. A simple reflection shows the exposed iceberg. We use the example of an iceberg. About 1/8 of an iceberg is visible above the surface. About 7/8 is below the surface. The part above the surface is what the person is telling you about. That's what they're talking about. But you will hear allusions and implications about the values and thoughts and feelings that they're not fully sharing. So we want to do the deeper reflections, which adds meaning, feeling, or emphasis and shows the submerged iceberg or what they are implying. You can make a guess about what the person means. It's okay to guess because you're going to have them either confirm or disconfirm that your reflection is accurate. And that's fine. They'll let you know. They'll say, well, that part's right, but no, I'm actually saying something a little different over here. Then you reflect that back until they go, that's it. That's what I'm saying. We continue the paragraph to encourage them. This is how we talk about the part that they're not saying. Reflection stops dead horse beatings. It's best to understand things slightly and keep it brief. So you can't reflectively listen if somebody goes on a 15-minute tirade. You have to stop at intervals and say, excuse me, but I want to make sure I understand what you just said, because you can't reflectively listen after 15 minutes. That's very hard to capture that much information and reflect it accurately. The summary, the S in ORS, is where we periodically summarize the problem as they see it, the options they like and why, agreements or any follow-up plans if we've been talking about those, and we're going to make it easy for them to say yes to our summary. You want to reflect in such a way they go, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, that's it. And we link to the next step toward our goal. So a summary is like the period. It's the punctuation at the end of a longer conversation that helps us see, and then it points us in the direction we want to go, is what we're doing with a good summary. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody, and boy, you hit a lot of good topics, and 5 minutes later you go, so what? Did we agree? We didn't get closure on anything. Summaries help us bring a whole meeting to a natural closure and point the direction. This is where you say, given that you've shown interest in this meeting about the REMI report, we will be happy to get you a copy of that. In fact, it sounds like it's okay if we share that with your staff member Jones, and we'll get that to you within the week, and we'll be happy to follow up with that. It sounds like you would appreciate having a chance to have some questions answered about that. Did we get that right? And when they say, yeah, that sounds great, boom. A summary is a reflection that encapsulates a much bigger chunk of the conversation, usually the whole conversation. Oars. Question?
So the reflective listening piece is kind of small summaries throughout the conversation?
Yes. So reflections tend to be little chunks, little bites of information as you go through the conversation. A summary is the closure at the end where you pull it all together. It's a good way to think of it. We think of it as a summary bouquet. That bouquet that you hand them is comprised of the flowers in it are the quick summaries of the whole thing together in one neat, tidy package. Question? Affirmations. Affirmations. So let's get down to some demos. Here's a demo. 10 slide means demo time. So I'm going to be the advocate. I'm going to be demonstrating oars. I'm sorry, your name is? Kathy is going to be my partner. She is a volunteer who's agreed to be. And who are you playing for us, Kathy?
Oh, I could try to be Peter King.
Okay. Sounds good. And what will our topic be, Kathy? What are we talking about?
I don't know. I was going to go simply doubting the science of climate.
Very good. You're going to talk about your doubts, concerns about climate science, data. Very good. Kathy, would you come up here so folks can see you? And I've got a mic here. I don't know. We've been having mic troubles all along. Testing, testing. You're going to have to hold it really closely. And if you'll come here because our cameraman can't see you over on the other side.
All right.
All right. So, and I'm addressing, you're playing who again?
Well, I'm not sure he really didn't. Well, I don't know how he feels about climate change, frankly, because he doesn't say anything about it.
You can fake it all the way, but just give me, you're going to be showing your doubts about climate change. So
Climate change,
climate change and climate science. And should I just call you Congressman Jones?
Okay, sure.
Jones? Okay, so that we protect those who may need some protection. So Congressman Jones, you know, it's been a pleasure to stop by your office over the years, and it's great to be here again this year with you. And I know that, and you have been sharing with me a few of your concerns about climate change. I know we've talked a little bit about that. Where are you with your concerns about climate science these days?
Well, I just think there's a lot of fake science out there. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any real evidence. I mean, look at the spring we just had. It was been freezing in New York. You know, I mean, all the plants are behind it. I mean, it's been in the 40s at night in May and June. This is crazy. How can you say we have climate change?
Boy, you know, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. There have been a lot of people who have raised the same concern with regard to climate science. You know, how could we believe that, and I hear you saying, it just seems almost ludicrous to believe that the climate is shifting in the warm direction when we see things happening in locations like New York City where you have unseasonably cold spring times.
Yeah.
That really makes it hard for you to buy into the climate science, it sounds like.
Yeah, you know, and, you know, where's the evidence? I mean, and these scientists, you know, I mean, we found these emails that they were sending to each other about how they're shifting and making things up and you know, I think it's just a gambit so they can get grants, you know. They've got a nice little cottage industry going here.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's really concerning to you when you see the media talking about behind-the-scenes emails between scientists that really cast into, sometimes raise some serious doubts about the authenticity of what they're coming up with. And it sounds like for both you and many of your constituents, that is a really hard thing to see and take climate science seriously.
Yeah, you know, and what can we do about it anyway? You know, I mean, if there's the whole climate for the whole world is changing, I mean, what can we do? I mean, look at what China's doing. Look at what India's doing. They're still building coal plants. You know, I mean, why should we be taking the economic hit?
So really, it seems that it's one of your concerns here is that you really care about fairness. It would be unfair for us to shoulder any action on climate when countries like India and China don't seem to be pulling their fair share of the load. They're moving other directions, and it seems like one of your values is about fundamental fairness. Why should America be out leading on these things when other major powers are not?
Absolutely, and thank God we have a president that understands that now and is out there leading the way, you know. Finally, someone's, you know, fighting for America.
And it's really important to you to see that we've, from what you've seen, that President Trump is trying to protect our American values and stand up for those.
Yeah, absolutely. He's over there giving him a hard time, and who knows, he may be forging peace right now, you know?
Certainly possible. We can certainly hope that that's the case, and we all would. Freeze action. How many of you have been keeping a tally of open questions, affirmations, reflections, summaries? Have you seen any of those? What are you seeing that you think? And let's get your input on this as the audience. First of all, have I agreed with this congressman once? No. What? No, I haven't, have I?
It seemed like you were.
Because it feels like I'm agreeing, but I have never once said, I agree with one point. Now, do I? Oh, microphone, thank you. I let it drift. Please remind me of that again. No, to my knowledge, I have not agreed with one thing. What else have you seen? Oh boy, and these are hard reflections, aren't they? Oh my goodness, this is hard reflecting. And you know, sometimes it's really easy. But when somebody is saying things that diametrically stand against your values, it's hard to do this because your brain is crying out, no, 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 no. And so I have to acknowledge, brain, yes, I know. This flies in the face of your values, but that's not what we're here to do. We are here to create a relationship with Congressman Jones. And if all we do is get into an argument, a tit for tat, back and forth, me trading my scientific facts for her bogus facts, or whatever it might be, this isn't going to end up well. I will leave a sour taste in Congresswoman Jones' mouth, and that's not my goal at all. What else have you seen? In the far back. I specifically did that because I said, what's the undergirding value? And you know, fairness, isn't that interesting? Mental note to self, carbon fee and dividend, it's got some really big things in it about fairly distributing the costs of carbon in the atmosphere. Now, let's back up for a minute. So, note, superordinate value. Can I use that right now? No. But boy, I'm making a note to myself that that's going to get woven into a future discussion here. But what stage of change is she in? 0 to 10, where's she at on accepting climate change? 0. She's 0 to 1. So I have to realize, let's get realistic here. I may not make, my biggest goal with her today may be to have a respectful conversation where, and I'm going to ask our Congresswoman now, Congresswoman Jones, you know, this is a weird question, I realize, but I just wonder, as a lobbyist, one of the things that we need to do is we need to be good at making sure, as lobbyists, that we understand our congresspeople. Could you tell me, like on a scale of 0 to 10, how well it feels to you like I'm understanding where you stand on these issues?
Well, you seem to have a much better sense of it than I thought you would initially. I'll tell you that much, you know.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. And if you were to give me like an ABCD grade, just in terms of how well you feel like I'm understanding your point of view, what would you give me? An honest grade?
All right, I'll give you a B.
Good solid B. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. If I can get a B from somebody like this in 5 minutes, I'm a happy camper. Because I'm about as far on the other end of the spectrum as I could be from her. Question over here.
You've got a B, but you don't have a backbone yet.
Right. So let's see what would happen if I had a backbone right now. What if I had launched in? Because let me tell you, I'm loaded for bear. I can go toe-to-toe with her on the science all day long. Because I know my client science, or my climate science. But do I know my client science?
Yeah.
This is more about client science than climate science. That was a Freudian slip, but it worked. Because MI is more about client science. Your client is right there. And if you don't know them, and this is about cultivating a relationship, not beating them the head over the... So no, if you're looking for a good fight, I can do a good fight. I've had debate. I've defended a dissertation. I know how to get into a good intellectual scrum with anybody. But where would I get with her if I did that? She has the voting power, not me. And let me tell you, she'll win that one every time because her vote counts, not mine. So what I'm doing here with Ors is cultivating relationship. So that once, because guess what? If she identifies me as not a member of her tribe, it doesn't matter how good my facts are. At the end of the day, she will vote in favor of what she thinks will do her tribe good, and she will dismiss me, and she's got every right to do it. She has autonomy. So you're right, this doesn't look like a backbone. Because if it looked like it had the backbone, the kind we're normally looking for, I'd look really good as a debater, but she's the one that gets to vote on whether I win the debate or not. And guess how she's going to vote? Yes?
I have a question that arose out of her comment when she said, well, it feels like you're agreeing with me. And are you in some way being disingenuous to engender that feeling? And even if not, what's going to happen when at some point it becomes clear that you don't agree with her? Because at some point,
it's a fair question.
honest and
Absolutely, because we are about honesty. So I could say, let's go there for a minute. Let's play it that direction. There's lots of directions we could go. Let's go there for a minute. If she were to say, I wonder where you actually stand on these issues, now what do I do? We have got an opening. So what I'm going to do, in fact, you're going to see here in a while, we have a way with MI to share information when somebody asks for it. And we want to get them to ask for the information. And if I could get her there to say, well, do you agree with, or it sounds like you understand me pretty well, but do you agree on these points? Here's what I would do. I would say, oh, it sounds like you'd like to, which part of this would you like to know my opinion on? Because I'm only going to speak as much as she wants. I'm not going to sit here and bury her, because I don't like it when she does that to me. I'm not going to do it to her. I am going to be so incredibly respectful here. So I'd say, Congresswoman Jones, what part of my opinion or what part of the climate science would you like to know my opinions on? And then I would let her tell me. Let's do that.
Well, I'd like to know what you have to say about how global warming really has, stands up to the facts of the really mild winter we had and the cold spring, I mean, it doesn't look like it's...
So it sounds like you'd like to know my opinion on something like that, which really creates kind of a thorny problem for a lot of people who talk about climate change when you get those localized cold spells. Oh, sure, I'd be happy to share my opinion about that. I have the good fortune to have as one of my best friends, Dr. Robert Davies, who's our state climatologist in Utah. And I asked him that question myself. What about this trend we see? And sometimes we get very cold spots, even when we say global warming is coming on. Here's what Dr. Davies explains as a climate scientist. There's a difference between climate and weather. What we're talking about, these localized phenomena, are what climate scientists refer to as weather. That's what's happening in the short term in a small prescribed area like New York City or the Pacific Northwest or so forth. Climate is what's happening on a global level. What's the average temperature of the planet doing? So for example, even though, to use a metaphor, my body might be quite healthy, my eyes are in great shape, but I've got athlete's foot. And I've got a bad case of it. So even though my eyes are fine, when we look at my overall body and my overall health, we have to factor the big picture into it. And so climate is more about the big picture, the health of the planet as a whole, where climate is about what's happening in a particular location on a small scale. So my friend, the climate scientist, would say your concerns are very important. They're about weather, and climate is about a much larger issue. I wonder, does that make sense? Because I know you get hit with these questions by your constituents.
I guess it makes sense, but I wonder why we should really care so much about the big picture when we have to deal with the local issues.
I love where this is going. I've got her asking me questions. A member of Congress is asking my opinion on climate-related stuff instead of beating the dead horse. This is the change I have wanted with her. Now notice, I gave her first I asked, what did you want to know from me? I'm not going to give her 15 facts if she only wanted one, because she ain't going to ask for that again. You won't ask your Uncle Harry to tell you his opinion if he spends 3 hours giving it to you. That's human nature. So I would much more sooner leave her hungry for more, and look, she must be, because she's asking me another question about climate. So what I do is I ask, what do you want to know? Now, the information has been requested, so there's no reason she should object to it. I give just that information in the most respectful way I can, knowing her values, and then I ask her opinion about it. Because it's about her, not me. And then when she asks for more, I'll say, let me make sure I understand which part you want to know about. Great, okay, I've been given permission and a request for that. I give just that much, And then I check in with her again. How did you receive that? What are your thoughts about that? How would you portray that to your constituents? How could you? Question back here. Great question. Here's the beauty. What if you don't have the answer to the specific question asked? Follow up. That's what we do at CCL. The beauty of teams is there's a good chance. We had a question on the last team I was at here on Capitol Hill. I had one of the leading economists in the United States on my team. And so I got asked an economics question. I go, you really ought to talk to Dr. So-and-so. Dr. So-and-so, would you have something to offer on that topic? If you don't have somebody on your team who can ask it, you can check with your team and say, you know, that's a great question. But we'll get back to you on that. And then we go do our homework, and that's lovely because we've got a segue to get back in their office and give them some more information. Love that when that happens. Any other questions? One over here.
You know, going back to we defend our tribe values and
self-esteem.
Self-esteem. Wouldn't it be the case that for most people, they are not really free to change their opinion?
Mm-hmm.
Because they, you know, it's from their tribe is saying this is what's true. This is the way that it is. And if you change your mind, you're not part of this tribe anymore.
That's a risk. That's a risk to empathize with every member of Congress we deal with. That's the boat they are all in. Because the number one job of a congressperson is what?
To get reelected.
To get reelected. So we have to frame, we have to deal not with the ideal world, we have to deal with the real world. That's the real world they live in, and I think you've made a lovely point that we have to factor that in. So I want what I'm doing right now is giving her the answers she can give to her constituents if she starts migrating in our direction on this issue. I want her to tell me the problem she anticipates defending this to her tribe because she's asking me for the information she's going to need to make a tribal shift there. Remember the Robbers Cave study? Those two groups were ready to kill each other, but at some point they realized, both the leaders of both groups said, it is now in our best interest to cooperate with the people we thought were our enemy because we now have a problem so big we need their help to solve it. We want to get to that place. Well, for sake of time, you got great questions, but I want to get you to some juicy stuff at the end on dealing with, thank you so much for your help with this, Congresswoman. So, let's give you a chance to practice oars. Let's see. Wait a minute, why is this not, whoops, I've got my clicker upside down. That's why. So, what I'm going to invite you to do in your triads now, you'll move into your triads. I'm going to invite one of you, each one of you think about playing your member of Congress. I'm going to have one of you interview the member of Congress to your right. So just one of you is going to start the interview process, and all I'm going to ask you to do is well, you know, for the sake of time, I'm going to move you forward to doing the full role play. Let's do all of ours at once. I was going to break it out to first focus on O and A. Just go ahead and practice any of them that you would like to. Open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, or summaries. Don't worry about getting it perfect. Feel free to make mistakes. So when you get into your triads, pick one person who's going to interview another person's as their member of Congress. So if you're playing the member of Congress, give them that cheat sheet and say, here's who I am. If you want to give it to them verbally and say, I'm a Democrat, here's where I stand on it, here's X, Y, and Z. Take just a very, 30 seconds to acquaint them. And then the third person is going to play the role of the observer, the free person. And here's what I want the free person to do. All you do if you're the observer is write OARS on your sheet, and every time you hear an open question, make a check mark. A reflection, check mark, same with affirmations and summaries. And then, so I'll give you the key. We're going to do this for about 3 minutes. Then I'm going to call time, and at that point, the person who's been doing the observation will give the feedback on how many O's, A's, R's, and S's they saw. Question? Oh, we've had some people who had to go to another CCL meeting, she points out, and they're down to 2 members. You're down to 2. Let's make a 4-person. So raise your hand if you're a 2-person team and you'd like 2 other people to join you. So there's the hands. Feel free to join forces with any of those people if you'd like to make a 4-person team. Okay, I will call time in 3 minutes from now. back together now. Okay, let's now have your observer. May I have your attention? May, ding, 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 ding. Attention. Take a break. Halt. Stop. Stop. Freeze. Time to stop. May I have your attention? May I have your attention? We'll wait till it's quiet. Thank you. What I'd like you to do now is have your observers, I sat in on this group, have your observers now provide an ORS count. What do they see? How many O's, A's, R's, and S's? And when you're the observer, you can do this in your home groups if you do triads there for practice, offer any suggestion. If there is something, instead of offering criticism, we usually find that's not as helpful. If you saw something that could have been improved, see if you can offer a suggestion on that point. Take 60 seconds, and then when I say stop, let's pull it to a stop really fast. We'll see if we can get that dead silent in here, like you just did now. On your mark, go. 60 seconds. Ten seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, stop. Oh, you did it much faster that time. I'm impressed. Very good. So, let's do a little group processing now. What did you experience in this triad where we focused on ORS? What were some of the things that seemed to be working? What were some of the challenges you ran into? I'll give you one challenge that I observed in the group that I was observing. The person who was playing the member of Congress was really stuck. They had been shut down on their moving forward with the bipartisan climate caucus. I came in a little bit late on, so I didn't get the particulars. But the poor person who was advocate, who was working, was really having a hard time. They were just saying, I'm in a deadlock. So on some of these issues, you're going to be playing with somebody who is like a 1 or a 2 on the issue. Those are really tough. And I should have suggested as we started out, for these beginning role plays, it's good if the member of Congress or the person in that role is playing somebody that, whatever the issue is, they're up in the ambivalent zone. They're up 4 to 6 at least, somewhere in the middle or maybe a little higher. Because I know you got some people like to play the tough cases, but it's kind of like math. You don't want to jump into calculus until you've had algebra. So I realized that was my bad. I should have recommended that role players played something a little bit towards the middle of the spectrum. What were some of your experiences over here?
So I have a question because my congresswoman says she really cares about the environment. I thought we were in agreement. I did not spend a lot of time reflecting her. So like your 4-2-4-1 ratio, like in the motivational interviewing book, is that a recommended ratio regardless of circumstance? Or like if we really agree, then we go lower on the reflections and focus more on the open questions?
Oh, I have to apologize. I apparently gave the impression that 4-2-4-1 was a right ratio. That's just an example. My apologies, my apologies. So no, in some cases, you're going to have 10 open questions, 2 reflections, and none of the others. You really have to use this flexibly. Whatever that person is doing, you just roll with it. If it looks like a good time to ask more open questions and do reflections, you go with that. When you saw me do this role play up here, you didn't see me do very many grand scale summaries because it just wasn't ready for that. So you just have to play it by ear. These are general principles. Use them to your advantage. Other comments?
Back on track.
Yes.
2710-1.
2710-1 is wait. Boy, they were cranking them out in your group. Woo!
Superstar for reflections over here.
Very nice. What else did you see?
And as the member of Congress, when I did get a reflection, it made me think, oh, maybe this, I didn't think they were a member of my tribe from other interactions, but maybe with this reflection, maybe there's sort of, there's hope they may be a member of my tribe.
That's
And
the
they said
feeling.
member of Congress.
Those of you who played members of Congress, did you notice the change in how you felt when that other person switched into just pure reflection? It sounds like you felt that difference. It is that feeling, maybe we've got something in common, this other person and I. Now, we may or may not, because again, we're reflecting here understanding, not agreement. But you cannot get to agreement without understanding. Too many people immediately jump to, let's get to agreement. Big mistake, especially if the person's down in the 1, 2, 3, 4 range. You've got to do much more understanding. Yes?
What happens when you're in a situation where the person that you're talking to instantaneously realizes that, oh, this is motivational interviewing that you're doing, and puts their guard up because they kind of know what you're doing? Can that be a win-win or a lose-win, win-lose?
Sure. When there is the danger, and this is the case when you first start riding a bicycle, it's a clumsy process. For those of you who train kids or remember learning yourself, it's very clumsy in the beginning. People are all over the place, and they're wrecking, they're crashing, they're skinning knees. That's going to happen with this too as you're learning it. It takes practice to get so smooth. Many of you in this room get on a bike and you don't even think about how do you balance, how do you make a right turn, how do you make a left. It is so automatic because you've spent thousands of hours on a bicycle. MI gets to that same place where it is second nature, where you step into a conversation in an elevator or in a member of Congress's office, and if you've practiced it enough, it's like riding a bicycle. You just naturally step into it. Many people say, how do I know if I'm doing it right? Am I getting the ratio right? It's not about the ratios. Here's the simplest subjective metaphor that I can give you for knowing if you're doing it right. Does it feel like you're dancing with the other person or wrestling? That's the feeling you're after. When it moves into this feeling of dancing, like you're getting along with a friend and you're having this conversation and they're saying something and then you respond back and they respond and it's going back and forth and the time flies, that's when you know it's become automatic. And yes, it's going to feel canned if you're new to it and you're doing it in a clumsy way. People may say, oh, I think that's that MI stuff. But after you've practiced it enough, it's just high quality connective conversation is what it is. Collaboration is what it is. So it takes practice, though. It's like the difference between me playing a Stradivarius and Yo-Yo Ma. I'm going to sound horrible, and people say, put that damn thing down. Yes?
I guess my challenge as the interviewer was there were so many things thrown at me with each open question that it was hard to pick the ones that were productive, that were geared towards the conversation I wanted to have and the reflection I wanted to get back to them to be like, oh, this will be the productive piece of it.
Yes. Common problem, quick suggestion for that. With open questions, you want to be asking your open questions in a strategic way because this is about focus. Let's go back to focus again. Know your agenda for this meeting. Are we trying to move them a little closer to accepting CF&D or getting them on the bipartisan caucus? If so, ask your questions strategically to bring it back to that subject. And so you don't just ask open questions willy-nilly. You can, much broader ones, if you're just trying to develop rapport with a brand new person to see where they're at. But once you've got that rapport and you've got that engagement, now you're ready to move up those 4 steps. And now we're moving towards a plan. And we want to get it much more focused. And we may even start the meeting by setting an agenda saying, you know what, by looking at our notes, we've been here at your office a number of times, our colleagues have, we noticed that you've had some questions about this, this, and this. It seems like maybe today a good thing for us to talk about are some of the obstacles you've run into with this particular issue. Boom, you've set an agenda, and now you can just strategically ask your questions to move things forward on that very, very focused point, so you don't get into the weeds. Good questions. In the sake of time, we're going to move on because I know there's some good stuff you're going to want to get before we're done here, but you've now had a taste. Do these triads in your home groups. You can do a triad anytime. Practice this stuff. Take it back to your groups. Say, hey, we'll learn some New stuff at the national conference this year. Who'd like to do a triad with me? And don't be afraid of making mistakes. You learn this stuff by doing it. Last one here.
I'll be meeting with an aide for the first time. I know that my representative is very much like the representative you did the role play with.
Yep.
But the aide may not feel that way. How do I negotiate? When do I want to hear what my representative has to say through his aide? When do I want to make the relationship with the aide?
Here's my short answer to the question. We could spend an hour on that kind of strategizing. Here's my short answer. I love aides. And most people say, oh, we don't get to see the member of Congress. I love aides. Aides have the ear of the congressperson the other 364 days of the year. And if they're more friendly, and many times they are more friendly, they almost always. Washington is run by 25-year-olds, have you noticed? I'll take an aide, because they tend to be more progressive in my experience, and they tend to be more open, and they tend to be more savvy, and they tend to be more open to new ideas. And if I can make some progress with them, they're going to have the ear. And guess what? They're a tribe member of that congressman. I'm not. So if I can make headway with a tribe member who can then work with the big tribe, the chief of the tribe, the other 364 days of the year, I'm down with that.
So what I'm hearing...
Beautiful. I'm ready for a reflection.
...is that it's very important to get the aide's opinion with some recognition that, yeah, I know that you represent Representative Posey, but I think your views are important because I would like to develop a relationship with you in a way that can help move this
Yes, yes. I think you're on the right track with that.
very upfront.
Absolutely. And can you coach me? Ask them to coach you. What can we do? It sounds like you understand the importance of issue X. What would you advise us to do? They will coach you sometimes about how to appeal to their boss. They know their boss. They've run into struggles with that boss. And in a weird way, you can develop a bit of a esprit de corps with them. And, gee, how can we get Congresswoman so-and-so moving this direction on this issue? And now you're game planning. You have now been admitted as a temporary honorary member of the tribe. Yes, nice going. Moving right along, since we have about 15 minutes left, and I have a resolution, I get people out on time. So, I'm going to skip a few slides. You've now seen, we're now getting into what we call change talk. And I'm not going to give this nearly the time I normally do because I want to get you to a place where we can talk about dealing with resistance. But change talk is critical, and I saw some of you in your groups where you could have really benefited from this. Change talk is where we want to evoke their motivation for change. People commit to the things that they hear themselves saying more than what they hear us saying. So we're going to get them saying things that move them in the right direction. Public statements and commitments build motivation. We do what triggers more change talk and less sustained talk. Sustained talk is anything that's moving away from our goal. We move away from that and towards change talk. Here's what it is, DARN, D-A-R-N, it's on your handout. Change talk, well, I'm just going to move right into it. D stands for desires, abilities, reasons, and needs. We want to get them talking about anything that has to do with their desires, abilities, reasons, or needs that move in the direction that we want to go. That's our agenda. So we're using open questions very strategically here. So I sat in on a group up here in this last role play, and I heard this young woman struggling mightily with a person who had, a member of Congress who had hit some real roadblocks with moving forward. So what we would do in a case like that is we do ask open-ended questions, but they're going to focus on what are, for example, we might ask a congressperson, what are some of the things that you could do, that's the ability question, that would move this in this particular direction. We want to get their ideas, their solutions. Again, they are much more persuaded by the solutions we've elicited from them than the ones that we're offering them pre-made. So this is what we do for, it's what we call preparatory change talk. If people are in the, getting up into the stage 6, 7, 8 range, we're going to switch into, well, I'm going to give you an example here first of this preparatory change talk before we advance. This is my personal representative, Rob Bishop. He's a very red Republican from northern Utah, my district. Here's a little story. I was on the CCL delegation to lobby him at his local office. I and my good buddies go down there, and I am very fortunate. I have a fellow who's a biologist on my team. I have another one who is an atmospheric science, PhD level atmospheric science. How many people have that on their team? We are loaded for bear.
You guys are all stars.
So, you know, we're going to have a good time, right? Because we got all the facts here on our side. Well, sure enough, my colleagues, bless their hearts, the atmospheric science starts explaining all the good reasons for going with carbon fee and dividend, and the biologist, he explains how it's going to affect our regional biology, because he knows all that. He's had a lifetime of studying it. Well, that's the expression on Rob's face. What's that telling you? We're not getting very far, are we, folks? So we had locked up. And you're going to lock up sometimes. It happens all the time. You can just see, and Rob literally had his arms crossed across his chest. He had an aide on either side of him, and they both had their arms crossed. And I could see them sneaking a peek at their watches occasionally. We're in trouble. So I say, time for MI. I went to Change Talk. I asked one Change Talk question. I said, you know, Mr. Bishop, I'm kind of curious. Do you have any desires or interests in addressing environmental issues here in our district? One question. D, the first D in DARNCAT, desires. What are his desires when it comes to environmental stuff? Oh my goodness. Our mistake was talking about the facts in our agenda. I asked about Rob's desires, and here's what I got. He talks about, he's been looking into carbon sequestration. He thinks there might be some potential to it. Is that our plan? No, but it's in the right direction. It's about carbon. He's talking about corridors for renewable power transmission. In fact, he was just at a meeting with Obama at the time, and he said, I talked to President Obama about getting some corridors made up in our area so we can get power from Wyoming, from those wind turbines down here. Is that CCL's agenda? No, but it's compatible. We're getting Change Talk here. We're getting him talking about stuff that's going in the direction we want to go. He talks about economic growth and sustainability, and we realize we're going to have to do some things to make the economy sustainable. That's Change Talk. That's what we're after. One question. So this is powerful stuff. It wasn't me pointing out and lecturing Mr. Bishop on what our agenda can do for him. It's asking him what he wants. His desires, his abilities, his reasons, his needs to go in this direction. Now he's handing me material that I can build on. And when I come back, we can be ready and say, oh, you know, Mr. Bishop, last time you expressed an interest in carbon sequestration. You know, we've got this little study here that compares carbon sequestration to carbon fee and dividend in terms of their relative merits. Would you be interested in looking at that information? It's about his agenda now. Question back here.
Well, not a question.
Comment.
But I would have gone to a different place on carbon sequestration. The place I would have gone is the markets for carbon. If you can build some carbon sequestration into your district, that the markets for that technology will be much improved as we begin to take action on climate change. The interest in that technology are going to build.
There's a nice segue where we can tie values that are ours to values that are his, and we're now moving to those superordinate values. Nice way. And if you know the science that allows you to talk about those segues, those connections, by all means do it. I'm not clever enough to know that science, but you use what you have, what you know in your head. If you can make those links between your values agenda and theirs, you're now in pay dirt. That is a wonderful place to be to. So that's DARN. Let's take a look at the next one. CAT. This is mobilizing. Now when you've moved people, so stick mostly with DARN if people are down in the 0 to 5 or 6 range. But once they start getting up closer to taking action and being more friendly, now we're ready to talk about CAT. Their commitments, activation is a fancy scientific term for willingness, and they're taking steps. What are the steps you want to call attention, have them talk about, and compliment them on the steps they have taken, and any action that's underway and any action that they plan to take. But you're only going to get CAT from people who are 6 and above on the scale. So set DARN aside. You've already established that they have the desires, abilities, reasons, and needs. Don't need to beat that horse anymore. Now we're talking about commitments, willingness, and actually taking steps. Talking is transforming into walking now. So that's it. Now, the question here. What happened? The whole nature of the meeting shifted at that point. You can feel it. It's the difference between wrestling and dancing. We felt like we were wrestling up to that point. We were jammed. We were stuck. And it was with all the right ideas. It was good science. My colleagues are good scientists. Mr. Bishop is a middle school history teacher. That's what he was before he was a congressperson. So it's not going to be high-level science that makes the difference here. It's going to be us connecting with his tribal values, his personal values and his tribal values. He committed in that meeting. I had a copy of the REMI report with me, and I said, would you be interested in this REMI report that CCL has commissioned, or that's been commissioned, and it talks about a number of these issues? He said, yes, you may send that to us, and we'd like to follow up and talk about it. Last comment here.
Yeah, if I could just make a comment, I really like that you say that it's not going to be high-level science, it's going to be the way we communicate, because I'm not a scientist, and sometimes I feel like I don't have the right to speak on these issues or whatever.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people worry that. And I think it's a good message for CCL to get out there that, like, we want all volunteers. Obviously, people highly
Yes.
important, but, like, we need everyone.
If you learn nothing from this presentation, it would be that message right there, which is it's about the relationship. These are tools for cultivating a collaborative relationship. Notice this is not about knowing your scientific facts. Yes, that's good to have some of that information, but in most cases, it's about the relationship. It's not about beating people over the head with facts. That too often causes the backfire effect anyway. So it really is empowering because it says you don't have to be a specialist. More, you need to be a specialist in human skills, human communication and human relationship building for this process to work. Thank you for that. Okay, in our last 7 minutes, I want to give you some tools for dealing with sustained talk, also known as resistance. It's the opposite of change talk. So I'm going to give you these quick and dirty dozen. I have sometimes made an entire presentation out of this slide because it's such a hot topic. And so I apologize. It's not a central part of MI. Usually we don't even get to this in a first workshop with MI. But because you've got interest, and by the number of cell phones in the air right now, it tells me, yes, you're pretty interested in this stuff. That's right, you can't. But these slides will be available. This presentation is being videotaped, and the actual slides, not a videotape of them, will be part of the materials you will have access to. So if your snapshot didn't take, don't worry, you'll have access to this. There's no way I can demonstrate all of these, but I'm going to hit a few of my favorites, because I use them all the time with my clients and with my lobbying work and in other work that I do. The number one rule is we roll with resistance. That's why it's at the top. That which you resist will persist. So if you meet resistance with resistance, equal pushback, watch it increase. It invites them to double down on you too, and that goes nowhere. So we roll with resistance. We want to acknowledge the truth in what they're saying. Did you see me doing that with my congresswoman here? I tried to acknowledge any truth I could see in what she was saying. I want to show understanding using the reflective listening. You've seen that one. That's a powerful tool with dealing when you find yourself just getting raw rejection. Be curious. That's what I did with the steak guy. I could tell I'm not going to make much progress. I can't get into an extended conversation here. I'll show some curiosity about his values is the main thing. So he feels heard, feels understood. Curiosity is a powerful tool. Affirm the values underlying their criticism. I think I tried to do that here because I tried to find a value undergirding your criticism of climate science. It's about fairness. I could hear, and you nodded to that when I said it sounds like fairness. It's not right to let China and India be getting away with murder. So acknowledge the true value. And do I believe in fairness? Sure. I think it's important. So I'm going to acknowledge those values wherever I can. And so there it is a bit of agreement. Affirm the values underlying the criticism, an amplified rejection. Be very careful. This one can backfire. Reflection, excuse me. Turn up, I misspeak when I go too fast. Turn up the volume on their objection, which invites them to moderate their view. So you reflect the criticism, but you reflect it at a slightly more intense level than they actually stated it, and in their effort to correct you, they're now moving in the direction of change talk. That will work, but don't overdo it. If you take it to an absurdly exaggerated level, it comes across as very canned. So just be subtly overstating in it and watch what happens. Could I do? Yes. Let me get through these and then I'll try to role play that one for you. Okay, amplified reflection, let's see, yes, two-handed reflection, on the one hand this, on the, okay, I can see if we're going to do role play, we've got 4 minutes, I can't do these. And one of my favorites, by the way, is the Columbo method. How many of you remember Columbo, played by Peter Falk? This is not an MI technique, but what Columbo did, he was a master of MI. If you go on the web and put in the Columbo method, you're going to get whole web pages dedicated to the ways he dealt with defensiveness, and it's straight MI. It was brilliant what Columbo was doing. He played the role of a stumble-bum detector. To wrap up here, let me do a demonstration for a few of these. So who would like to play somebody who's going to be a little bit critical? So you can be down that spectrum ways, down in the 3-4 range, maybe not a solid 1 or 2 that's just wildly irrational about everything. Who can do that for us? And I'll try to demonstrate a few of these. Come on up. So who are you, and what are you going to be giving me crap about?
We can call me Senator Smith.
Senator Smith. Senator Smith. Oh, is that working?
Is this working?
Yes. Senator Smith, thank you for joining me. Senator Smith, I hear you've had some objections about some things lately that we've been talking about here at Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm just kind of curious to hear a little bit more about those.
Yeah, I do care about taking action on climate change, but more so, I really care about prices being raised for my constituents. I have a very low-income community, and I care a lot about them, and I can't tell them that your gas prices are going to be raised a ton, and they won't stand for that, and I won't stand for that for them. I have to protect them.
So your job as their representative in Congress is really to look out for their best interests, and a high percentage of your constituents are very low income, and your concern is that if we put a price on carbon, they're immediately going to be paying more at the pumps, and that could have just a very damaging effect on their well-being.
Yeah. They're gonna see me as someone who isn't looking out for their interests, and how are they gonna see the good benefits of putting a price on carbon? When all of a sudden they're having to pay way more a month than gas?
So boy, in some ways, it would maybe be better that we don't do anything about carbon in the atmosphere and its effects because of the clearly negative effects it would have on the poor.
Well, I don't think that. I wouldn't say that, but I feel like we should figure out a way to do it without hurting the poor.
Oh, so if we could find a way to do it without harming the poor, then you'd be open to ideas that achieve that?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanna help my constituents, and I also want climate change.
Do you see where I can go with this now? Did you hear her say, well? Okay, amplified reflection. If I had taken that too far and made it outlandish, it would not have worked. But I cranked it up. I simply reflected back her objection, but I took it a little more extreme to say, so really, you heard it. And notice what effect it had on her. It caused her to reverse, and now what did I get? Change talk. If there was a way, well, I'll be darned. Did you know our program? But I can't be too quick on that. I want her to suck that information out of me. I want her, and now I'm setting this up so that she will ask me, I'll put a little bait out there and see, would you be interested in knowing how our program of carbon fee and dividend would address that very problem? Would that be something you'd be interested in hearing? I'm asking her permission to talk about that, because if I just dump it on her, it's going to be inviting resistance. But now she's asked for it, and she's asked for it in 2 ways now, and it's much more likely to be well received. Do you see the difference? That's the difference. So, we don't have time to go into these, but I wanted to get them up on the board. You'll have them. They'll be part of the presentation that I send out. Hopefully, you have seen a little bit of what MI can do for you. I hope I've whet your appetite a bit and that you'll be hungry for more. If we did this in 6 hours, which most people in the MI training world say, don't even try to give people a really good introduction in anything less than 6 hours. So I apologize if this feels like you have been flying. You have. But let me assure you that there is much rich material here to help you, not only with your lobbying, but any time else that you need to collaborate and cooperate. You have been a fantastic and participatory audience. I want to thank you for that and wish you the best in your lobbying. Good luck to all of you.
Recommend the book.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, there is a book. It's called Motivational Interviewing. Motivational Interviewing is the name of the book, and we do have our monthly webinars on MI, so please join us. We're on the website. Check in and come join us on every month.